Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
Welcome to Her Way of the Podcast for another episode of On This Week, where we take a journey back in time and relive some of the key events that took place on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. Now we're kind of into pre-season, the season's almost upon us, but you go to the On This Week lineup today. One regular though is back with us, is Chris Wynn. How are you, Chris?
I'm good, mate. Once again, just glad that you're back and you're in the hot seat, and I don't have to spread myself across things we've got listed and try and know a little bit about everything. So, yes, a little bit of pressure off. So good to have you back, mate.
Well, you say that, but we're having to do without Andrew and Kelvin. They're both on their holiday, so we've had to draft in our On This Week debutant, Gavin Henderson. How are you, Gav?
Yes, very good, mate. And I thought you were going to say pod virgin, not pod debutant, but I'll take it. It's a lot better and a bit cleaner, isn't it, for this time of the day?
It is. Well, it's early in the morning, so, we'll save that till later on. Yes, Andrew and Kelvin aren't with us today, so we are going to tackle this week in history of Sunderland by ourselves. But Andrew did leave us with a quiz question at the end of last week's episode. And it's in relation to, obviously, somebody who's got something to do with this week in Sunderland history. So the clues were, he was born on the 4th of August. He was a very talented player. I am putting my own spin on Andrew's clues. He did do it better than I did, but it was a very unpopular decision to sell him. He was a local lad. He was a full international. He was an FA Cup winner. So did a bit of a job on them. So do either of you two have any inkling as to the identity of the person who Andrew was referring to last week?
Eric Gates?
No,
not
Eric Gates.
Chris?
But,
I can't remember.
There's a few little bits there that do run parallel with Eric Gates. You could put, he wasn't born on the 4th of August, so it immediately rules him out.
Well, there we go. Did win the FA Cup though, didn't he? Or have I made that up as well?
Well, it's interesting because we're going to come on to Eric Gates later on, and which won the FA Cup while he was there, but he didn't play.
Well, there we go.
We're talking Nick Pickering?
Nick Pickering is the answer, yes. So, and he had a spell on one of the radio stations in maybe in the early 90s as co-commentator.
Threw me that was the one that threw
it. Did as well.
The radio one, yeah.
That's why I thought Gatesy as well. I thought, he was all over the radio, him.
Mm.
He was. But we will kick off on August the 4th, so in 1958, Nick Sharkey signed from St Patrick's School, Dumbarton, in 1958. In the 1959-60 season, he had a pretty unusual distinction. He played for Sunderland's junior team, youth team, and first team in the same season. And of course, Nick Sharkey is famous for 5 in a 7-1 win over Norwich in 1963. As we've already said, in 1963, on that same day, as Nick Sharkey was banging in the goals, Nick Pickering was born. And in 1979, and we talked about Ken Knighton's appointment a few episodes ago, didn't we? About the roller coaster ride that was the 6 or 7 or 8 month search for a full-time job. Billy Elliott had a spell as caretaker towards the end of the previous season. After going for every big name the club could think of and getting down by all of them, they eventually appointed Ken Knighton. And on this day in 1979, it was his first competitive game in charge. It ended in a 4-2 defeat at Gig Lane against Bury in the Anglo-Scottish Cup. I'm not sure if Bury moved country at some point. It seems like a very Anglo tie to me. 1984, very prestigious Was it the Gore Trophy? I think it was called the Isle of Man Trophy. We beat Blackburn Rovers.
The Gore Gold Cup, I think it's called. There you go.
Colin West bagged a goal to get a 1-0 victory in that game. And in 1988, we beat Newcastle 5-0. And Marco Gabbiadini scored a hat-trick. Newcastle Town, unfortunately, not Newcastle United.
They all count, man.
Well, indeed, I remember reading that in the newspaper in the Northern Echo, and I'm like, having that. 2006, Ward signed from Norwich City on a free. Now, he's an interesting one, Darren Ward, isn't he, when you look back, because he came in, I think, didn't Quinny sign? That was the summer that everything was all over the shop. Kevin Richardson had been in sort of caretaker charge, whereas we couldn't find a manager. There was rumours about Allardyce coming in and Martin O'Neill coming in. Quinny obviously took charge. And Darren Ward was signed as essentially a goalkeeper because they thought Ben Annick would be the first choice. He was, as Quinny was sometimes a little bit guilty of doing, he hyped Ben Annick to the heavens. He called him new Jimmy Montgomery, I think. Darren Ward came in after a little while. He kind of got himself into the team, but I always think he's a really unsung player in that spell of Roy Keane's time in charge. He was a very good goalkeeper.
He's somebody. Sorry, Chris. He's somebody who, when we did the goalkeeper pod the other week, I was thinking about when we did the top 10, and I totally agree with you, Martin. I think he was fantastic that season. And if I remember rightly, I felt a bit sorry for him that he didn't get the chance in the Premier League because he'd been that good.
But he was
a real steady pair of hands, wasn't he?
He wasn't. Craig Gordon came in to obviously take his. He even came back into the side for a game or two, didn't he? After that Everton game.
Yeah. It was. Well, I'll talk to Craig Gordon a little bit about that, didn't we? About that in that Premier League season, but Darren Ward. He'd played one game or something at Norwich in 2 years before he came to us, and he came as an understudy, didn't he? Because we didn't have any backup for Annick.
Yeah.
And he came basically to sit on the bench. It was almost like the Moore type role, wasn't it, that we've got, or that we had last season. He was just going to say, yep, I'm coming to a big club and I'm going to sit on the bench. And but Roy Keane put faith in him. The amount of times actually Roy Keane talked about Darren Ward being brilliant for us. And and I remember, was it Burnley at home? I'm sure he made a cracking save against Burnley at home, I think, in that big game. I remember him tipping it around the post or something like that. But yeah, it all started. I remember the story. Niall Quinn said, didn't he say he would have meetings with the whole squad alphabetically? And and very quickly he realised that Ben Annick, he said, right, well, I'm off. And there was someone else, I can't remember who it was now, but like the 3 players or something said, I want to leave. And he went, right, basically, does anyone who wants to stay, put your hands up. and yeah, so Darren Ward was but it was an easy one, wasn't it? He wasn't getting a game at Norwich. I can't remember whether he was out of contract or not, probably. Got him on a free, I would guess. But yeah, did the business, and it came into the conversation when we were talking about a shortlist for top 10 keepers of the last, the Stadium of Light era.
No, he was a very, very good keeper, and as you say, somebody who wasn't expected to come and actually play a great deal of football. He seemed to me always have a big off-field presence as well. I think he was quite important in the dressing room. But his distribution impressed me. And even when Craig Gordon came in, I always thought we kind of missed a little bit of Ward's distribution because he could throw the ball really accurately for miles, couldn't he?
Yeah, he did. He's throwing. That was the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about him, the way he could just ball the ball out overarm and send it over the halfway line to someone's feet. And isn't that a skill you don't see anymore? You
don't see much, do you? No, you don't see it much.
You see them use their feet plenty, but you don't see them do that with their hands too often. And you kind of wish that they did, because it gets you up the pitch really quickly.
I remember Peter Schmeichel being starting that off, and everyone thinking it was this. He was breaking new ground because he was throwing it over the halfway line. Yeah, and everyone just thought, and every keeper tried to copy it for the next 2 or 3 years after.
And the thing with Ward as well, if you kind of just touched on it there, Martin, he was one of a clutch of players that Quinny signed. And when I think about it, was he the only one who really featured heavily that season out of the bunch that Quinny brought in?
He was, because we didn't make any signs that really stuck around for too long. Roy Keane didn't seem to fancy any of them, did he? I think there was Kenny Cunningham, there was Robbie Elliott, We signed Toby
Tobias
Hussein, who I thought was a great player, by the way, but Keane didn't seem to fancy him at all.
Yeah, I'm a bit sad. Like I was still a bit of a kid, like, but I had his name on the back of my top. I loved him, me.
No, I thought he
Really
was
did like
excellent.
Toby Hussein. Yeah.
But now, so I think Ward the only one that, unless we're missing somebody, but I can't think of anyone off the top of my head.
There was William Mockwatt and Arnow.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, he signed some top players, didn't he?
Well, they came into the conversation for worst foreign players to have played for us, but they hadn't played enough games to qualify for the criteria we had.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I was actually surprised Kenny Cunningham didn't play more games that season, because you expected him to come in and be that mainstay at the back. But in the end,
finished, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was done, wasn't he?
Finished. I don't think Roy Keane liked him from their Ireland days, did he? If I remember rightly.
Well, that's it. It's a long list, that, man.
Yeah, there's a story in Quinn's book about Kenny Cunningham when he started doing his first few training sessions, wasn't it? And then Kenny Cunningham, because of his Irish days, started calling him Roy. And Roy Keane was like, that just does it. But before that, he said he didn't want the other players to call him Gaffer until Kenny Cunningham went, all right, Roy, or all right, mate, or something like that. And he went, this isn't, I've got to have something. And he went, right, you don't call me Roy, you call me Gaffer. And he said when he heard himself say it, he was like, not sure about it, but I'm not having people calling this mate and Roy around the training ground.
Now, the only other one that we haven't mentioned in terms of new signings was Clive Clark, who I don't think Roy Keane thought too much of either, did he?
You reckon?
No. Yeah, I don't know where you get that impression from.
Yeah, I'm quite good at picking up on subtle little clues. Now, in 2009, on the 4th of August, did a signing. Obviously, this week we've seen Xhaka announced in the present day. 2009, we made a big signing as well. Darren Bent became our record signing. Initial fee of 10 million quid from Spurs. That could increase to 16.5 million. And that was a huge signing for Steve Bruce, wasn't it? England international. He'd lost his way a little bit at Spurs. We know, obviously, Harry Redknapp's wife could have finished a chance better than Darren Bent on occasion, but Sandra wasn't available, so Darren Bent arrived up in the northeast. But he was class. Like Darren Bent, that first season at Sunderland, Darren Bent was immense, wasn't he?
Yeah. It's me and Nav have talked about it recently. We might have even talked about it on a recent transfers pod last week. But this type of player, the Darren Bent of the world, don't exist anymore now. That purely where the only thing they do is score goals. They don't really get involved in the build-up. They don't get involved in any of that nonsense in midfield. They don't really hold the ball up. They don't pass it wide. They're basically they're within the width of the box, and they're never, they basically hang on the last man. They're as far forward as possible, and they're waiting to get in behind, or basically the ball to land to them in the box, and it's their job to be in the right place and just stick the ball in the back of the net. But the Darren Bent role has completely gone out of the team, because now when Pep did his thing, everyone expects the 10 outfield players to contribute to everything now. Whereas once upon a time, it was like, as that striker, it was like, well, you close down a bit, but conserve your energy, because we want you to be bouncing around in the box when the ball falls to you. But, you talked about 10 million. It's amazing now, because in my mind, I always think of this transfer as being, that kind of 16 million, 17 million, 18 million mark. But when you see an initially of 10 million for an England international who's still scoring goals at the top level, I mean, it was almost a steal, wasn't it? You almost think back you're actually staggered to think why bigger clubs weren't in, because I remember that whole was going on. And weren't we, I think we were vying with, there's a few clubs in from
it was that tweet.
Hull and Stoke?
Do I want to go? No. Do I want to go to Stoke? No. Do I want to go to Sunderland? Yes. And he was calling Levy out and all sorts, wasn't he?
Do you not think that someone of that quality, that, no disrespect, I mean, even ourselves at the time, we were fairly new to the Premier League, so like a higher caliber team maybe weren't trying to sign Darren Bent, because he was that good.
But how much did that comment from Harry Redknapp actually put the seed in? It almost kind of knocked him down a few rungs, didn't it, in terms of profile? That he became like this player that almost the media were deriding because of what Harry Redknapp said. And at the time, Harry Redknapp had this profile where what he said went, and it almost went through football. Whereas, somebody who missed a chance like that, they miss a chance. But if you look at his goal record, like, why wouldn't a club at the time? You're looking at, even your Arsenals or someone like that at the time who, could have done with 20, 25 goals a season. And you saw his finishing with us when you could argue, he didn't get a bucket load of chances because we were always, we were at best a mid-table side. Stick him in a top 4, top 5 side, 30 goal a season striker. And, but I do think that Harry Redknapp thing basically stuck with him.
Well, it did, and I think at the time as well, if you're looking back now, you're talking, the best part of 20 years ago, aren't you? At the time, Harry Redknapp was, as you say, Chris, he was held in very high regard by everybody, wasn't he? He was held as like the best English manager. Really, obviously, at national level, we'd gone through a number of foreign coaches, but he was really highly regarded, and what he said held a lot of weight. But Darren Bent had come closest for us before. I think when he left Ipswich to go to Charlton, Mick McCarthy had tried to get him, and he hadn't quite managed. Well, he didn't manage to get over the line. And of course, Darren Bent came on the first game of the season, didn't he, and scored against us at the Stadium of Light. But this was a massive, massive signing for us, as I said earlier. I think when you're talking about him going to a higher team or a higher quality team at that point, I guess the reason that people didn't do it as well was because you almost have to kind of set everything up to play to him. And I think this is what Steve Bruce did really well. Paired him with Kennan Jones. The whole team was basically set up to spring Bent. And we did it really well. But you had to kind of set things up. And whether other managers at higher or bigger clubs would have, or bigger teams rather, would have done that, I don't think they would.
Yeah. I suppose you had to build a team round him, didn't you? You had to build a team that, as you said, the ball ended up with Darren Bent, and you had to work a chance for him rather than work as a team and do something random almost. But sorry, just to go off on a complete tangent. Can anyone remember it was really early on in the whole social media thing, and very early on in the whole hashtag thing, and there was you're talking 20 years ago now, but the hashtag Ask Harry. And it was like about 2005 or something. Can anyone remember that?
Is this where the club got Ask Danny from?
Well, it blew up. It was about, honestly, I was still at uni. I think I was coming to the end of my uni. So it was like I said, it was about 20 years ago. And it was one of the first hashtag things. So it was like hashtag Ask Harry. And people just completely abused it. It was when it was first there. And it was like, one of them was Ask Harry. It was like, Harry, is it true that you finished second in a Harry Redknapp leg competition to a melted candle? And the other one was, Harry, is it true if I hung my testicle out of my car window, I'd be interviewed by Sky Sports News? But basically, it was just hundreds and hundreds of, and if not thousands of replies like that. And basically, they had to pull it just because it was absolutely ridiculous.
But speaking of, bring it back on the Darren Bent a bit, but that was the first time I can ever remember a transfer playing out on social media. If you remember when we signed Darren Bent, because he had a mate, didn't he, who was on Twitter, and his mate was like posting his boarding passes for Sunderland fans to see.
That's right.
Obviously, that tweet you mentioned before, where he basically called out Daniel Levy, said like Levy sorted out, didn't he?
Yeah.
He went very public with it. But I can remember that whole thing. Was his mate called or something? Do you remember?
Right.
He was like a little.
It was high. Yeah.
He had like a snapback cap on all the time, and I don't know. He just became sort of famous among Sunderland fans, and he was like keeping up to date on what was going on. Like say posting his boarding pass for his flight up north and stuff. I mean, it was. I can remember how into it everyone got at the time. It was a big deal, wasn't it?
You're right, though. I think it was probably right in saying it was the first transfer saga that played out online. Because didn't he end up? I can't remember because Spurs were going to some sort of pre-season tour in Asia, weren't they? And did he refuse to get on the flight, or did he get forced to get on the flight and he had to fly back or something like that? Because he was basically, I don't want to go on this pre-season tour. I don't want to fly out to Asia. And I'm pretty sure he either refused to go on or publicly said he didn't want to go on, and then either had to get on the plane or just, I'm staying here and sorting out this deal. And it was a big, massive thing. And obviously, it's amazing to think Daniel Levy, like 15 years later, is kind of almost still the same type of owner, isn't it?
Still doing the same thing.
Well, it was interesting as well that obviously after Bent had done all of that and it went public with his displeasure of how it goes, Tottenham made him apologise publicly before they would sanction a deal. And Darren Bent released a statement. It said, "I appreciate that transfers I appreciate that transfers are seldom straightforward. I regret my actions and did not intend to offend Daniel Levy or anyone with the nature or the content of my posting." He definitely wrote that, didn't he?
What he should have done, you know, that you seen when South Park take the mick out of BP, and there's like a BP executive in this log cabin in front of a log fire, and he's got like skimpy shorts on, and he's stroking like a rug that's basically a bear, and he's just saying, "I'm so sorry." But he wasn't. It doesn't sound like he was at gunpoint at all to do that, did he?
No.
Of course, he got a bit of revenge on Spurs when they came to the Stadium of Light later on that season. Well, he scored in the first minute. He scored a penalty on 29, so we were 2-0 up after half an hour. Then he went and missed two other penalties, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Peter Crouch got a goal back for Spurs, and it all looked a little bit shaky, but Bolo Zenden scored that lovely sort of volley in the north stand end, didn't he?
Can't remember now thinking about it. Was he a bit suppressed in terms of his celebrations? I can't remember. Or did he go for it? I can't remember.
No,
now.
he gave it a big lick.
He went
probably went for it.
I can't remember.
If I remember it, because I sit in the southwest corner, it was when the away fans were still there to your right. I'm pretty sure he took the two penalties in front of their fans as well, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to look that up.
The first, so he scored in the first minute in that end, and then he scored the penalty in that end. Then he missed. Did he miss two penalties in the second half?
I think he did.
Or maybe one in the first. Oh no, there was one just towards the end of the first half he missed in that end, and then he missed another in at the other end.
It's that whole weird thing, isn't it? Like he scored twice against Spurs, but then he missed two penalties, so it didn't feel. It almost like, you know, one sort of counteract the other, didn't it? And yeah, it was a bit strange. It was a Gomez in goal for Tottenham that day.
It was, I
think he saved the penalties. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just going back a little bit. I mean, because that was a huge summer. You know, that when Steve Bruce came in, because that was, you know, we had this magic carpet ride with Roy Keane, and then we had the Ricky Sprazier kind of weirdness where he kept us up, but it was all a bit strange. And, you know, as we heard later from Ricky Sprazier, Niall Quinn was trying to offer him the job, and he was turning it down and all this sort of stuff. So we had to have this reset. And Darren Bent was a massive statement that summer. And we went from real kind of uncertainty with Roy Keane leaving, walking out, Ricky Sprazier coming in, to this summer of, right, we're gonna go again. And it was almost like that second stage of that magic carpet ride where it kind of dipped a bit and then it went take off again. And that summer ended up with that opening day of the season against Bolton, where we had a central midfield of Lorik Sana and Lee Cattermole, who both made their debuts. And Darren Bent was the other person who made his debut, and it was at the Reebok Stadium. And actually, you saw that side that we had, you know, so full up in goal, Bardsley, McCartney, Ferdinand Collins at the back, Mulbranck, Sana, Cattermole, Kieran Richardson midfield, and up front, Kenman Jones and Darren Bent. And we beat Darren Bent, scored after 5 minutes, won that opening game. And actually, at that point, you thought, we've got a chance here of doing something, of really kind of kicking on here and really kind of not just establishing ourselves, but, you know, we're a couple of signings away from almost pushing for that top six.
That's right, absolutely.
We talked about this on a pod the other week, because if I was looking back at it, because I was at that Bolton game when Bent scored on his debut. Did he score a header or
back post?
Back post.
My memory, back post.
But the big thing about that was there was a lot, not just because of the signings we'd made that summer, but it was, I think, the first time I can really remember where we saw a lot of the games in pre-season televised that year. So we played the Amsterdam tournament, and both those games were on TV. We played Benfica and Atletico Madrid. Then we played Celtic, and I remember watching that on telly. And then the Hearts game, Darren Bent made his debut and scored in that game. And there was just a bit of hype building. And I think it's because for the first time, fans had got to see a lot of the pre-season games, and it was like, oh, there's something different about this team. And I remember going to Bolton, and I compared them to the Galacticos the other. I was like, it was like Sunderland's version of the Harlem Globetrotters or something. But when I see the team written down, there was only 4 debutants, but it felt like it did feel like a fresh new team. I kind of compared it to what's going on this summer, where Sunderland just went out and we did splash a bit of money, and we kind of acted big for the first time in a while, and we did have that feeling. I mean, Sana was not to go off on too many tangents here, but Sana, Catamol, Campbell, and Bent, they were big signings for us at that time.
Huge. And you've got, you say with Sana, captain of Marseille, international captain, bringing him in, huge statement as well as the fee that we paid for Bent. Getting Catamol in with, if you kind of look back at that time, Catamol was rated really, really highly, wasn't he? He's come through a Borough, made his debut at 17 or whatever, captained them at 17. Few disciplinary problems, couldn't go out in the arm and all that sort of stuff. So he went to Wigan under Steve Bruce, and he turned Wigan. He had a brilliant season, and all like the Liverpools and Man U's were getting linked with him as a potential signing. And because Bruce came to Sunderland, he wanted to bring Catamol back to the northeast. And Catamol was at that point, he was a real box-to-box midfield player. I know later on in his career, we saw him almost as a very static midfield player. But in the younger days, he was a box-to-box midfielder. He was full of energy, he could pass, he could progress the ball forward, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And the start of the season the good start of the season really culminated in that. Remember that Liverpool game where we beat them 1-0 with a beach ball? It was what everybody remembers it for. But we were down to 10 men, weren't we? And Sana kind of played centre half, and we were down to 10 men. Or did we have an injury or something like that? I'm sure Sana kind of ended up dropping back into defence for the last half an hour. It was a real backs to the wall sort of game, and we managed to see out the win. But we were sitting 6th or 7th in the table then. And when you look at the squad that we had, you had Bolo Zenden made his debut in that Liverpool game. We really should have pushed on from that point. Like we completely fell away, didn't we, under Bruce in the second half of that season? But we really should have pushed on in that season.
Yeah, and you're absolutely well. It's one of the things you talk about, Lee Catamol, and I think pretty sure he was captain of the England under-21s as well. And I think did he break a record for the amount of under-21 caps or something like that? But he was really highly rated. And if the player that left Sunderland, or even a few years later, wasn't half the one that joined, because that first season, him and Sana in that midfield was about as, and I kind of say, a stereotypical Sunderland midfield as you want. Like those two players box, running up and down the pitch, crunching into players, driving forward with the ball. And it was brilliant. I mean, actually, as fans, absolutely lapping it up. Absolutely loved that centre midfield. But Lee Catamol, he never kicked on. He didn't seem to want to kick on and become a better player. He seemed to start believing his own hype in terms of I go around and clatter people instead of becoming a better player. And it was I suppose representative of that team in a way that team didn't kick on. And Catamol was one of the players who didn't progress with the club.
Well, you see, Chris, I've got sorry to jump in there, but I've got a recollection of Catamol getting injured in that Liverpool game. Did he do his knee or something? Because I don't know if my memory's playing tricks on this knee.
He did get a couple of injuries. Well, I can't remember.
I think that kind of halted his progress, because he started off so well in that midfield with Sana. And it was, when I look back on it, right, you don't get a midfield like that nowadays, do you? It's going to sound like a really old bastard Saturday. But
well, I started it with the strikers, so you might as well carry it back into the midfield.
You had that almost, not quite a little and large partnership. You had Kenwin Jones who would win the headers and Bent would play off his shoulder. And then you don't get this midfield pairing where, it's probably like the football that we played when we were kids. Okay, play a set midfield. You go, I'll stay. If I go, you stay. And that's how Catamol and Sana played. If one of them went, the other one would just drop back, and vice versa. And, he didn't have a holding midfield player. He didn't have this box-to-box midfield players. And you don't get pairing like that. Well, you very rarely get a pairing in centre midfield players anyway, do you? But you don't see that in today's.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, Roy Keane's talked a lot about that on the overlap, hasn't he? Where he said he doesn't like the terms where he said he doesn't like people being categorized in midfield, where it's like you're the holding midfield player, you're the 6 or you're the 8. It's like, well, I was a midfielder and I just did everything. So
well, that's exactly right.
But it's just interesting as well. I mean, you'll not be surprised to hear in that game against Bolton that Steve Malbranque came off. I think on a top 10 pod recently, I think I worked out that he was substituted in like 70% of the games he played in, or something like that.
I'm surprised it's higher.
Yeah. I was surprised at that, but he was replaced in the second half in that game by Jordan Henderson. So you look at that midfield, wow, that's a good 4 in midfield. We're bringing Jordan Henderson on, young lad who went on to win European Cups and almost win tournaments for England and stuff like that. So it's we had that in reserve on the bench to come on. So I just thought at that time, I mean, it's funny because we'll go back and we'll talk about lots of kind of crossroads in Sunderland's history on this week. And I tell you what, the Steve Bruce era is one of those where Steve, and I think some of it comes down to the limitations of Steve Bruce, that
100%.
he was able to get
100%.
us looking good and get us so far, but he was never able to do what he was never really able to get the full potential out of that team.
No, we finished 13th that season.
He's always been a bit of a checkbook manager, though, hasn't he, Steve Bruce? Let's be honest.
Because of his character, he's always look at all these clubs. He's always had that honeymoon period to start with, where it's like, oh, he's a great fella, him, and then it always wears off after a couple of years. I think the same happened with Birmingham.
But he's always spent money as well, really, he's always spent money in jobs where he's done pretty well, and it might not be exorbitant amounts of money, but it might be jobs. Even when he's got teams promoted out of the Championship, they've gave him the ability to sign players and stuff. And I think his, when he actually, I know we're going off on a massive tangent, but still, it was
that's
the season
what we do, Gav. That's
I know.
Welcome to week, Gav.
Yeah, I know. Like the season after, he made a lot of really impressive moves in the transfer market, but a lot of them were short-term deals, and we were buggered for a couple of years as a result of it, because he wasn't able to, some of those players we loaned in, he wasn't able to hold on to, or some of the good players that we did sign, like Sana, Bent and Jan, they didn't stay for more than 5 minutes. So it was like, he was quite good at getting some of these players in, but it wasn't so good at retaining them or signing players who we could develop. And I mean, Bent, just to bring it back to him, I guess, we got him because he'd had such a tough period with Spurs, and we rebuilt him, but he deep down, he never wanted to stay at Sunderland long term. He probably just seen Sunderland as an opportunity to play some games, get some goals, and get himself back on the radar of big clubs. And we'll probably talk about it on another podcast, I guess, about how he left the club and stuff. But I never really got the impression with Bent that he wanted, he done the tap and the badge thing and all that, but I don't think he ever really wanted to be here over the long term.
I think he loved until, and I can't remember, I'm trying to think whether it was the tournament at the end of that season or was it the next one? Because I think it must have been the 2010 international tournament.
It was it was another World Cup in 2010 when he didn't get into the squad.
He banged the goals in that year, and he should have been in that squad.
Yeah.
And I think after there was an interview with him, I remember reading in that where he basically said, the only reason I'm not in this squad is basically because I'm playing for Sunderland.
Yeah. And that was a frustrating thing, wasn't it? Because when he was at Spurs on the bench coming in for a game here and there, he was in the England squad more often than not. Comes Sunderland, banging in the goal, and he disappears from contention. He's left out. I think he was left out of the squad. Was he left out of the squad altogether in 2010?
Yeah. He didn't make the squad because I remember him saying that he'd be on, because actually a lot of the national media actually were kind of against the decision not to take him because he banged.
No, that's right.
I can't remember how many goals he got, but he was banging them in that season, looking brilliant. And I remember him doing that interview saying it's because of who I play for, and I think that's when it all started.
No, that's it. But on Cattermole very quickly before we move on. So he got injured in that Liverpool game. That was the 9th game of the season for us, and he didn't come back. That was in October. He didn't come back until the end of Feb. So he missed November, December, January. He missed 4.5 months of football. in that first season. And I was thinking when he came back, even that season, he wasn't the same player as we saw for the first little part of that season. He was a different player. I think his injury, he had injury problems all the way through his career to some extent, didn't he? But that kind of was the first of them that held him back to some extent. We'll move on from Darren Bent on the 4th of August. We're still on the 4th of August, first day of the week. 2018, it was the Charlton game at home. It was the first third-tier game at the Stadium of Light. Lyndon Gooch got the winner in the last minute after Chris Maguire started his Sunderland career by giving away a penalty. August 5th, 1978. Now, sorry, go on, Chris.
I was just going to say we should probably mention, just because he's probably going to become a legend, it kicked off Luke O'Nine's career as well.
Luke O'Nine made his debut for the club, of course, on August the 4th, 2018.
It was only 45 minutes long. It was only 45 minutes long, but we'll gloss over that.
There were 6 debutants in that team, by the way. Just looking at it, and you've probably got it open in front of you, so I'm not going to ask you who they were.
I haven't.
I genuinely haven't.
How are they? Right.
Well,
so,
McLaughlin.
Yeah,
John
there's
McLaughlin.
one.
Glenn
Leuven.
Leuven's correct. Yeah.
Luke O'Nine. Chris Maguire.
Luke O'Nine.
Jerome
Maguire,
Sinclair.
Yeah, he came off the bench. There's one more.
Started or come off the bench?
Started. Played centre half.
The left. Centre half. Ozturk.
Ozturk, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, that team, bloody hell. I mean, sorry, we had the fullbacks that day were Donald Love and Adam Matthews. Also on the bench were Jack Baldwin, Denver Hume, Elliot Embleton, Luke Molyneux came off the bench, Brian Oviedo. Charlton only named 5 subs as well for some reason. We had 7, they had 5.
I tell you what, and it's a conversation for another day, but this is why I think sometimes Jack Ross gets a harsh deal. I think to turn that around and do all right by the end, I think
it wasn't exactly
it wasn't
he didn't inherit a quality team, did he?
No, he didn't. And he had no players in pre-season. He had to bring all in that dross and try and put them into an 11. And to come out where we did, to come out so close at the end of the season, I'm not saying he did a spectacular job. I just think there's some area in the middle what people don't give him credit for.
And on the opposition team there was Lyle Taylor, who of course had turned us down that summer, and he scored again. He got the opening goal with a penalty in the 10th minute. Strange game.
And if anyone wants to see more, it's all on Netflix, of course.
Oh God. Good goal, by the way. Do you remember it? Brian Oviedo's cross on the back post.
Oh, yeah.
Gooch's header.
Brilliant.
Yeah, good goal.
Brilliant cross.
One of the versions of Oviedo showed that he's actually a decent player.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's the whether he was or not, or whether he had desire to be, is a whole other conversation, isn't it? But I don't think he did for Sunderland. I'm going to try to move on to August the 5th again.
You can tell our tone just came down talking about that game.
August 5th, 1978. So, Michael Bridges was born on this date, and this is relevant to me because he is the first person younger than me who I saw playing for Sunderland. And realisation hits. There's a couple of stages in that where you know you're not a footballer. One is when you see somebody younger than you play for the club. Next one is when you see there's nobody in the squad who's younger than you anymore. But I don't know if you'd probably be able to figure it out at some point. But yeah, I think it was come on sub in a 0-0 draw in a midweek game against Port Vale at Roker Park. But that was a moment I realised that I wasn't going to make it.
The one that always hits me is when you see a player play for Sunderland who was born after you left school.
Oh yeah.
So that was Chris Rigg for me. I was like, oh God's sake, man! I left school before he was.
Yeah, but all bets are off when the owner of the club is almost 20 years younger than you.
Yeah, that's. So you to continue my bit, you've got other stage. You got when the managers are younger than you. That's a bloody harsh lesson. Then the owners are younger than you. You know, it's when the president of the senior supporters branch is younger than you. That's when you know.
It's funny about timing though, isn't it, with Michael Bridges? Because he had the talent, to be an absolute Sunderland legend. He just came at a time where there was two legends ahead of him, and but he could have been an England international playing for Sunderland or anything in a different parallel universe somewhere. He's a Sunderland legend with England caps and all that sort of stuff.
Here's a question for you, right? If Peter Reid had more faith with him in that top flight season, the last season of Roker Park, did we stay up?
Well, any of them, because can you remember the interview we did with Craig Russell when I put it to him, and he said there was so much frustration because there was him, Martin Smith that year, and Michael Bridges, who and I always remember the game being in the full end, and people were going mad because he played Paul Stewart up front on his own, and David Kelly right wing, 5 across the midfield, and you've got these young'uns who, when they came in, because Craig Russell, I think he said, I'm sure I put it to him, and he said, I still think about this season because it was off the back of his best ever season when we went up and he scored those 4 goals against Millwall, and he's now a Premier League player. And he says every time he came on or got a half a chance, he scored a goal or looked lively in the Premier League. And then the next game, he said he benched.
That was bizarre.
I couldn't understand it.
Yeah, well, it was a game away at Everton at Goodison Park before Christmas. And Russell scored 2 and Bridges scored 1 and vice versa, and we beat them 3-1 or something.
Do you remember Martin Smith scooping it over a defender to Bracewell and getting a goal off it? Brilliant. But
we never played 3 of them much at all.
No, as well, just wondering this, I think he was 25 when he left Sunderland. So he hadn't been really a Yeah, or am I getting that wrong?
No.
Sorry, he was born in 78 and he left in 2004. So what does that make him? Sorry.
No, that was the second time, wasn't he? So he left the Leeds in
21.
90, and again, that's one of those sliding doors moments, isn't it? Where
so he'll have been 21, but either way, my point was, is it not a little strange? He never got a loan anywhere, maybe to prove himself, maybe where Peter Reid have seen him do well elsewhere, or
because he was involved all the time. He was kind of in the squads and stuff.
Yeah, he was in the first team squad from when he was 17, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was more. I was more like thinking that that season when we got promoted, and he was clearly second choice. But him and Dicho both got 12 goals each, and both contributed despite not starting every week. I just wonder maybe there was a point before then where he might have been asking for a move somewhere, just because he had sort of 4 seasons there where he wasn't a first team regular. And I find that strange.
But you have to, no, it is. And you look back in hindsight and go, a few months where it would probably have done him good. But he didn't get players going out on season-long loans then. It was a month here or a month there, wasn't it? He didn't get a full year anywhere.
And you look at games like you mentioned, that Everton one in January. You remember we played Arsenal, because we played Arsenal a few times, didn't we? Because we got them in the third round of the cup in January.
Aye.
But the league game, we beat them 1-0 at home. Tony Adams. Yeah, but we started off in that game with a front 2 of John Mullen and Michael Bridges, and Craig Russell came on to replace Michael Bridges. So they kept getting involved. This is the thing. Like Gav, it wasn't like they were completely just disappeared for the whole season and we didn't see them. They kept appearing on the bench, but then not getting on, or then suddenly they'd start and do well, and then they'd not start the next game, and Paul Stewart would then be up front on his own, and you'd be going, what happened to that? It looked good. And all through that season, I mean, that was one of the frustrations of that relegation. There was so much that people couldn't understand about that season that, and I think if we didn't have that move to the stadium like Roker Park, there might have been a slightly bigger frustration because there wasn't other things to distract people. But there was a lot of people going mad towards the end of that season.
Isn't it a weird situation where you've got a backup striker who you've not really put full faith into, yet Leeds and Tottenham are to buy him, and for decent money?
Well, that was the thing that in that spell in the first 2 seasons of Stadium Light, Bridges, it's things he was the backup striker that Quinn and Phillips and Dickie was as well, but he kind of wasn't, because he was seen as Quinn's replacement longer term. So he was kind of in the team, out the team. He had a long spell around the first team, or in the first team, when Phillips picked up that injury at home to Chester in the League Cup. and he scored a number of goals. He performed well, and I think I think we've got a different perspective on players' ages because of what the club have done in the last 3 or 4 years. This was a lad who came through 17, 18, and there weren't many players coming through that young at that time. You had Martin Smith and Craig Russell, but they were kind of maybe the year or two ahead of Bridges, weren't they?
But he was getting a reputation kind of nationally when he was coming through. I think everyone knew of this coming through at Sunderland. And then when he did things like, because it wasn't him and Dickie who started against Oxford when we beat them 7-0. I think those
scored
they were up front. And then Bridges had the games like...
By the way, Martin likes to mention that every time.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And then Michael... and he had games like, that one where he completely finished Steve Bruce's playing career at Bramall Lane.
Yeah.
But there was games where Michael Bridges took the mick out of the second-tier defences. And then when we got in the Premier League, I think there was this, can I trust him? Has he bulked out enough? Is he strong enough?
But that was... that Sheffield United game was the season after, wasn't it? So that was after he'd been in top flight, because obviously when we went back up, he left.
Well, that was in the championship winning season, wasn't it? When we won
Yes.
That was in the 105-point season.
Correct, yeah, but then he left at the end of that season.
Yes, and then, but this was the thing. It was like that question mark of like Peter Reid wasn't going to say, well, you're going to replace Niall Quinn this season, because Peter Reid still had a question mark about him in the Premier League, didn't he?
Oh,
and then he thought, well, and then when he got a $5 million bid in for him, but before that, when Bridges realised likes of Spurs and Leeds were after him, he threw in a transfer request, and that was it, because he knew, bizarrely, like you said, Gav, like Leeds were going great guns at the time, Robbie Keane, I think, and all that, and yet Michael Bridges looked at what was in front of him in Sunderland and thought, I'm not getting in here, but I'll get a game at Leeds. Just purely because of the Quinn and Phillips thing?
Well, they had a reputation at the time, didn't the Leeds, of bringing young players through and all that sort of... And like, he would never have got that amount of football as he got with Leeds that season with us.
And the other thing you've got to remember, this was the era where pretty much every Premier League club had 4 strikers. So they'd always have 2 on the bench, and they'd have their first 2. I mean, bloody hell, this is the time, you're talking late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, famously, Man United in the European Cup final, because they swapped out Dwight York, Andy Cole, Solskjaer and Sheringham constantly.
Oh, well,
and every club had that sort of system where you had 2 and then you had 2 underneath them. It was just timing where it was Bridges and Dickie all below Quinn and Phillips.
Look at how the game's changed as well, though, Chris, because now when we talk about Sunderland signing a third choice striker, I'd say, well, who's going to want to come and be third choice? But you're right, it used to be every team had 4 strikers, didn't they? And majority of the time they were all quality.
Right, we're going to go to 1992 now on the 5th of August, because Sunderland celebrated becoming a city with a pre-season game at home to Tottenham Hotspurs.
Yes.
And Chris, were you there?
No, I wasn't, but
I was.
I'll want your input as when we come on to that, because we're going to do some nerdy city council stuff first, because we love our nerdy tangents on here, don't we, lads? But yeah, in terms of becoming city status, it's funny because I was reading up on this, and go on, I'll put this question to you, see if you had the thinking to me. But a city in the UK, what designated something being a city? Yes, but when I started reading up about it, it said historically we were right. Cities were settlements that had a cathedral, and that's how it all started off. But so now you've got, I think you've got quite kind of small cities like Salisbury and stuff like that. But it's not actually a requirement to have city status to have a cathedral. And the first town apparently without a cathedral to become a city, I'm sure you two know this. I'm telling you information that you already know. It's already in your banks there, that you already know, that it was actually Birmingham in 1889. That was first town to become a city in 1889. But when we became a city, because you've got to think of the era, you've got to think late 80s. So the shipbuilding went, the coal mines went, and basically Sunderland. So it was a bit of a dark place, really. End of the 80s, kind of coming into the 1990s in terms of being a town. And then the football club kind of threatened to do well under Dennis Smith, got to the top flight, and then we had that big cup final. And actually, it happened during that season because, did you know, it was actually the 5th time Sunderland had applied to become because back then it almost became a little kind of, it almost became a full-blown competition back in the day, because you look now, and I think I was reading again going back to 2022, there were actually 8 towns were awarded city status. You had Bangor in Northern Ireland, Colchester, Doncaster, Dunfermline, Milton Keynes, Wrexham, and then you had Douglas and Stanley and the Isle of Man and Falkland Islands. So it's almost like they're just handed out. So cities are getting getting awarded all the time. But back in the day, we kept applying for years and years, and there was one in we were almost given city status in 1974, but it was given to Derby. There was a bit of an anomaly that was caused as a result of the new local government boundary reforms, and that because of the constrictions back in 1974, that made the East Midlands town, like Derby, that was the largest non-city, so that gave them the edge back in 1974. So we come on to 1992, and it was this process where actually the city council had this massive big document of why Sunderland should be given city status and all this. And in the end, there was a little bit of, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure the people at the council did a fantastic job and put something forward. But there was almost this, I don't know, kind of conspiracy theory, I suppose, that the government gave Sunderland city status because they basically shafted them the years previously. That they almost went, oh well, we'll let them be a city because we've ripped the shipbuilding out, we've ripped the coal mines out, so we'll pat them on the head and just they can be a city in 1992. Because there was 20 applicants that applied for 1992 to become a city, and because the reason for making somebody a city in 1992 because it was to mark the Queen's Royal Jubilee, because it was 40 years on the throne in 92. And it actually happened, we came down to a final shortlist of 3, and the whole bid that we put in, because it was like almost like, when countries bid for the World Cup and European Championships to host it and all this, we had to put in a big bid, and the bid was essentially around our history and the people and all this sort of stuff, because obviously in terms of industry and stuff, it had all been ripped out, so that's pretty much all we had left. But it came on Valentine's Day in 1992, and it was announced that Sunderland would become Britain's 54th city in 1992. So then in May, which was, I think it was, looking at the date, it was probably a couple of weeks after the FA Cup final, a delegation from Sunderland travelled to London, collected the documents that officially confirmed the new status, and then on the 28th of June, it was declared as City Day. And on this day, all of the city's leisure facilities were opened free of charge to the public. So I'm sure the Courtney Leisure Centre was absolutely packed out that day, and you had to wait in line for the slide and all that sort of stuff. But so that was kind of all going on as we were going through this kind of cup final and struggling in Division 2, kind of on the pitch. But I don't know if you remember the other thing that changed that year, and I remember genuinely all the signs changing because of the city status. The Polytechnic immediately turned into university, so all the signs were changing for that to be a poly, and we actually had a university. I remember all the signs for years still saying town centre. And I don't know if you're the same, but when we were young, we used to be like, right, what we're doing Saturday night? Oh, we're going down the town, and you still hear it now. Like
my mum still says I'm going to town when she's going shopping. Aye,
everyone still says it. But yeah, so obviously we had this whole cup final season, struggling Division 2. Bob Murray reluctantly gives Malcolm Crosby a contract because we've talked on this podcast before about Neil Warnock, and if you go back to we did a podcast with Malcolm Crosby, and he talked extensively about because Neil Warnock from his playing days, and he found out later that he refused the job because Malcolm Crosby was getting Sunderland to the FA Cup final. So Bob Murray he was put in this really strange position where Malcolm Crosby wasn't really his man. Malcolm Crosby, in some ways, wanted to go follow Dennis Smith to Bristol City, but he ended up that summer being Sunderland manager and having to rebuild this squad. And then we had the turmoil as well. Paul Bracewell leaves for Newcastle after the cup final, so we've lost our club captain who took us to the cup final. Paul Hardiman then left because he was miffed off that he wasn't in the starting 11 for the FA Cup final. And then we start bringing in players. So we start, actually at that time, it felt like we were really splashing the cash because we hadn't done it for years. And amazingly, Sean Cunnington, we've talked about Sean Cunnington before on this podcast, and Martin's holding up. There you go. He's got the programme with all of the players signing. 650,000. And
it's a lot of money, mind.
It was at the time.
It was a lot of money then.
He was our most expensive midfield signing at the time. Then we got John Colquhoun, who Calvin Went did a big monologue about the other week and fell in love with John Colquhoun all over again, which was a beautiful thing to listen to. He came for about 200,000. And then the next one was mainly because of his assistant, who he had at the time, which is Bobby Ferguson, who was manager of Ipswich and Bobby Robson's number 2 back in the day. And he persuaded Terry Butcher to come to the club, who'd been trying to keep fit but couldn't train. And then we went through a few kind of pre-seasons, and to celebrate City status, they had a big kind of attraction in terms of bringing Spurs to Spurs to Roker Park to celebrate us getting City status for this big pre-season friendly on the 5th of August. And Spurs were in a bit of transition because they had finished 15th the season before, and they were actually managed they had caretaker managers at the time, Livermore and Ray Clements. They had sacked Peter Shreves, but they had also lost Paul Gascoigne. Obviously, he went to Lazio for $5.5 million. Gary Lineker had gone. Paul Stewart had gone to Liverpool. They were bringing in players like Neil Ruddock from Southampton, Jason Cundy from Chelsea. So they were kind of relatively big names. But the big one was actually someone they'd taken from the same division as us, and they'd bought a 20-year-old Darren Anderton. Don't remember that being a big signing, Martin.
Well, it wasn't. Darren Anderton had kind of come onto everyone's radars in the FA Cup, hadn't he? So while we were a second division club going on our FA Cup run that season, Portsmouth had done the same thing. And they got beaten in the other semi-final against Liverpool at Villa Park on the same day as we beat Norwich at Hillsborough. And Darren Anderton being one of the stars for them, hadn't he? So the FA Cup was massive back in those days, wasn't it? There wasn't as much football on TV as there is now, of course. All of the quarterfinals, semi-finals were all televised. And, Darren Anderton really kind of got on people's radars and the attention. And a lot of clubs wanted him.
And it went to a replay, didn't it? The Liverpool-Portsmouth semi-final? Or did it go end up penalties?
I've got a feeling it went to extra time and penalties. Let's have a look.
Yeah. But Darren Anderton was fantastic in that semi-final, and I'm sure it was televised at Villa Park. I'm sure it was Villa Park that played at. Yeah. So he'd signed from Portsmouth for $1.75 million.
Yeah, sorry, Chris. They drew the semi replay, lost in a penalty shootout.
Yeah, because I can remember us waiting to find out who we were going to play.
Yeah.
While all that was going on.
But again, Darren, those sliding doors moments. Portsmouth beat Liverpool on penalties. We play Portsmouth in the FA Cup.
What? And then Darren Anderton scores a hat-trick.
Darren Anderton scores a hat-trick.
we get beat off Portsmouth instead of Liverpool.
John Burns still misses at the back post. So.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, Darren Anderton was. I mean, because I've got. I'm kind of working it out, but actually, when I worked it out, that $1.75 million, it was a similar there was a similar outlay that Sunderland had spent on our first 11 and substitutes that night when I'd kind of worked it all out. But yeah, I mean, we'll just so people get an idea that the lineups for that night. Sunderland had Tim Carter in goal. Tony Norman came on from Martin Gray right back, Butcher and Kevin Ball in the middle at the back, Anton Rogan left back. Then we had Hours, Atkinson, Cunnington, Colloon playing wide for once, which I think we should have played there more. And then Goodman and Byrne up front. And the big names in the Spurs side that night. So it was Ian Walker in goal, Fenwick, fullback, Cundy, Ruddock in the middle, Justin Edinburgh back, then Darren Anderton, Vinnie Samways, Howells, Paul Allen, and then they had Hendry and Jury up front, and Nick Barmby came on as a substitute. But yeah, pretty much a full house at that point because it was 22,672, pretty much a full house. I remember Terry Butcher. I remember everyone being excited to see Terry Butcher. And just before I pass back to you, Martin, for the actual game, because Darren up scored a penalty, and well, his last goal was a penalty. That finished his hat trick because Spurs won 3-0. But Bobby Ferguson's comments after the game, Martin, I'll be interested to hear whether you agree with this or not, if you've got memories of the game. But he said, for the first 20 minutes, we could have been a couple of goals up. But as soon as we got a goal against us, we started playing totally differently, pumping long balls straight down the middle. If we're going to bottle it in front of a big crowd, we have no chance. I don't know if that matches your memories.
He always he was very softly, gentle sort of person, Bobby Ferguson, wasn't he? Sort of put his arm around the players.
Is that a step up from David Moyes saying we were in a relegation after 2 games, writing us off in the pre-season match?
A very similar ilk. I seem to remember at the start of the game, you kind of going into this, look, our league form the season before had been poor, but you've got this confidence and belief from the FA Cup run because the games that we played against the likes of West Ham and Chelsea and all that sort of stuff, Norwich in the semi-final, and even the way that we performed against Liverpool, because we could have been in the lead in the first half of the FA Cup final. And you're kind of going, we're a good side. We've got a good team. And, yes, Bracewell had gone, but I might be right in thinking he was the only player to really leave from that core group of players who we had. Terry Butcher, and again, you look at Terry Butcher through a different lens as Sunderland supporters now because of what happened in the sort of 12 to 18 months after this game. But Terry Butcher was a star. Like, if you can remember watching him in Italia 90 for England and beforehand, he'd been one of Ipswich's best players for a decade. He'd pretty much been England captain whenever Brian Robson was injured or unavailable. He was such a rock solid central defender and had the character as well. So, again, you're talking in modern day terms about the need for experience and need for a big character to lead the team through. This is what we kind of thought we had with Butcher. And yes, he'd been manager before, but he'd had a short spell as player manager at Coventry. But when he went to Coventry, he had the choice between going to Leeds and to Leeds as a player under Howard Wilkinson and to Coventry as player manager. He went to Coventry. I think he was only 32 or 33 at this point. It wasn't as if he was 38 or 39. He was still a relatively young chap.
But his knees were going from basically his from I remember 1990, the World Cup. He was struggling a little bit.
But I think he'd had a long-standing problem with his knees, so this wasn't anything new, really. Yeah. Then Don Goodman was available now for everything. He hadn't been available for the cup run, so if you took Goodman into that side, and then you got Colquhoun, who had a great reputation as an exciting right winger, and then like Sean Cunnington. Now, again, Sean Cunnington's kind of a name that provoked a bit of derision from people who saw him play, and probably rightly so with the performances he turned in. But at the time, Sean Cunnington was one of the best midfield players in the division, in Division 2, whatever it was at the time. He was a proper box-to-box midfield player. He could score goals, captain, very highly regarded. So again, you're kind of bringing in a player who you think is going to add goals, add experience, and replace what Bracewell had left behind. And I can't. My memory is not that good. I can't remember if we should have been a couple of goals up in the first 20 minutes or so, as Bobby Ferg's word for it. What I can remember is we were absolutely outclassed. We were awful, and you had this whole thing building up City status. I think it was free to get in, which is one of the reasons why we had such a big crowd for a friendly. It was free to get in. It was kind of a gift from the club to the city or the community to come along, and the performance we turned in was awful. We looked not the races completely disjointed. Pre-season you can kind of write things off. We were just miles off it. Now, yeah, my overriding memory of this game is my cousin Billy. He was born in '86, so he was 8 at this point, and he'd been brought up in Peckham, but he used to come back up to the northeast for school holidays, summer holidays, all that sort of stuff. And me and my dad took Billy along to this game, but obviously being brought up in Peckham, he had a proper Cockney accent. Now, I can't do a Cockney accent, so I'm not going to try. But after the third goal went in, we everyone's a bit pissed off and given a critique of the game. But this little Cockney lad swinging on the bars in the Fulwell end, going, Flying Tottenham, like that. And all the old blokes around us would piss themselves laughing at this little Cockney lad with a Sunderland hat on, slacking Tottenham off. So that's my overriding memory of the game.
That's the best Cockney accent I've heard since Dick Van Dyke, mate. Dancing around with your chimney swing.
Yeah, chimney, chim, right? But no, that's it was one of those pre-season. You always, whichever way the results go in pre-season, you get some, you find some comfort or contentment with them. You go, it's pre-season. They'll learn from that. Oh, it's good fitness exercises. There's minutes in the legs. I think pretty much everybody who walked out of that game probably thought, we'll be in a spot of bother this season. And as it turned out, we were correct.
Yeah, because like I read out, I mean, look, you've got your Barmbys and your Andertons and your Juries, but Spurs weren't a fantastic team at this point. They'd lost a lot of players, and if you look at that I read out, it's okay, it's decent, but it's not star-studded. It's not
Spurs had
brilliant.
Had that reputation, didn't it? So Spurs in the late 80s, early 90s, it had this big reputation of being an attractive football club. You'd had Waddle playing for them. You'd had that spell with Terry Venables in charge and Gazza and Lineker and the 91 Cup final against Forest and all those stuff. So you had this aura still about Tottenham. This is only a year later.
Yeah. But this is but this was the start of when Spurs had that 4 or 5 years actually where they flirted at the bottom half of the Premier League for quite a few years. And this was the start where Spurs had a good spell of not being fantastic in Premier League terms, and flirted with relegation a couple times, I think.
So, yeah, you're not talking about one of the top 6 coming to Roker Park and turning this over. You're coming to you're looking at a club that, if we pulled them out of the hat in the FA Cup, we probably would have beaten them the season before.
Yeah, and just to talk about that pre-season, by the way, because we had one more game after this, which was Scunthorpe, and we didn't win a game in pre-season. So we drew against Falkirk, drew against United, got beat off Carlisle, got stuffed off Spurs, and drew against Scunthorpe, and that was going into the first game of the season at Swindon. So it was strange because it was on the back of that cup final run, and everyone just thought, oh well, okay, so we basically are a first division side because that was the first season after we'd come down. We should be challenging at the top. Let's put last season down to, a bit of a hangover from going down, and we had the cup run. So this season we should really be giving it a good go. And, spending relatively big money on Sean Cunnington, I mean, don't get us wrong, losing Paul Bracewell was a blow. But everyone thought, should have half a chance this season. And actually just talking about Sean Cunnington as well, of Swindon, Glenn Hoddle's Swindon on the first day of the season, he actually scored there at their place. But the first home league game of the season was against Tranmere Rovers. This was the second game of the season at Roker Park, and Sean Cunnington scored the winner. I remember slid in at the back post, I think he did. And everyone thought, brilliant, we've got this we've got Grimsby's captain. He's
Yep.
off and running. He scored the winning goal against Tranmere, and here we go. But it just never happened. And it was, if anyone wants to go and listen back to Malcolm Crosby's take on it, it is really interesting how it all played out.
And there's another little story that just continues on from that Tranmere game, which I think it was one of the On This Week pods that I missed. I was listening to it, and I was wondering whether you'd bring this up, because I think you talked about Cunnington in the start of the season. But Malcolm Crosby was still desperate to get an experienced midfield player in. So he'd bought Cunnington, but he still had a little bit of money. He wanted to get somebody in, and primarily to replace Bracewell. The player he'd earmarked was Danny Wilson. So Danny Wilson, who went on to manage Barnsley and whoever else, was playing for Sheff Wed at the time. And he must have been 31, 32-year-old, Northern Ireland international, bags of experience. And we had a deal pretty much lined up for him. The game after the Tranmere game, Bristol City. Now, if you put two and two together, Dennis Smith had left Sunderland and gone to Bristol City. So Dennis Smith was in charge of Ashton Gate. Malcolm Crosby obviously in charge of Sunderland. Malcolm Crosby didn't manage us that game because he went to Arsenal to watch Danny Wilson play against Arsenal for Sheffield Wednesday. And Bobby Ferguson took the team against Bristol City. You can't imagine that happening now, can you? Where a manager goes, I'm off. I'm going to go and watch a player. And you're not watching somebody who's a foreigner who you've never seen before from Scandinavia or something. You're missing the game to go and watch a 31 or 32-year-old top flight player who you probably watched on a number of occasions. So it always struck me as a really bizarre thing to do, especially at that sort of in Malcolm Crosby's tenure.
Well, there was the other thing as well in pre-season. Again, I'm trying to remember word for word what Malcolm Crosby said, but talking about Bobby Ferguson, he wasn't his first as assistant. I think he wanted
George Armstrong. So there's
that's it.
fellow who was at Arsenal who coached out in the Middle East with Crosby. So he wanted George Armstrong, but because Crosby had only got a 1-year contract from Bob Murray, he could only offer Armstrong a 1-year contract, and he wanted more security than that.
Yeah, and then the conspiracy theory was that Bobby Ferguson brought Butcher in, who'd already been manager of Coventry, because he almost saw the writing on the wall, the 1-year contract, and how it would all go. So
now I'll tell you what,
conspiracy theories flying around about that.
If anybody else has the programme to this game in front of them somewhere, in the opening page, there's a photograph of Malcolm Crosby welcoming Terry Butcher outside of the stand, the main stand, right? And obviously nobody listening to this will be able to see it, but I can hold up to you two. Right? If that is not the look of somebody saying, "I'm here to take your job," right? There's a knowing look in Terry Butcher's eyes, and Malcolm Crosby's thinking, "Oh shit."
Could have at least got poor Malcolm a stool to stand on or something.
That's the easiest caption competition ever, isn't it? That one.
So there we have it. The game to commemorate City status being awarded to Sunderland.
Yes, and thank you. And I just want to say it's a pleasure, guys, for my talk on council bureaucracy in England.
There you go.
Thought we've never had that on this week, so there you go.
You get all sorts in this pod, don't you? 1973, August the 6th, obviously we won the FA Cup. Celtic had won the Scottish FA Cup, and we played a friendly at Parkhead against Celtic. We beat them 2-1. Dennis Stewart and Billy Hughes scored the goals. 1993.
Good idea, that though, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's kind of almost like a different sort of charity shield, isn't it? But
yeah.
That'll be too much crowd.
I was going to say, yeah. And it'll be the same teams every year, wouldn't it? They get bored of it.
93, Andy Melville joined the club from Oxford. We paid 500,000 plus Anton Rogan. So we signed him for 350,000 about 18 months earlier or 2 years earlier. So that was, a deal in total. I was getting on to £1 million in terms of value. So it was a big money move for Melville. And that was part of Terry Butcher's spending spree, which we'll come on to in a second, because obviously by that point, following on, we're talking only a year after the Spurs game that we talked about, but Terry Butcher had got himself in charge. Well, I was going to say saved us from relegation. He oversaw us staying up by default. And then
he was there.
He was
He was
there.
present.
Well, present might be strong, but he was
Yeah,
there.
okay.
But for whatever reason, in Bob Murray's wisdom, he decided to give Terry Butcher all the cash he showed Dennis Smith, and somebody drove the wrong way around the roundabout. But we'll come on to that because Melville was one of those players. He was Oxford captain, only Welsh international, and I don't think we need to talk about Andy Melville because we've talked a lot about Andy Melville in terms of how good he was, especially in that promotion season from the first division up into the Premier League at the Stadium Light, but also the season that we got promoted at Roker Park. He was superb. 9 Martin Smith, another person who we've mentioned already on this pod, he left on a free transfer, joined Sheffield United. And again, that's a big call. 1999, that season that we went up, we talked about the players that we lost. That was some of that. Bridges went and Clark went and Alan Johnson was shoved to one side, wasn't he? But Martin Smith also left, and he hadn't played a great deal that previous season, but he's somebody who you always look back and go, he should have been. I know he was brilliant for us, but he should have been a legend for us.
Yeah, really interesting when you hear him talk about it, because he always said that he thought Peter Reid kept offering him contracts purely because he scored that goal to keep us up when he first came in, that winner against Swindon, and he said he said he even wasn't playing. Peter Reid was kind of saying, I'll give you a new what do you want? I'll give you a new contract, 2-year contract, yeah. And he said because of that he always felt like he stayed too long, that he should have left. Like he should have pushed to leave and kick on, because, as you said, when he came through, and talked about it before, but not long, I think it was only a couple of months after he came through and started playing, we played Villa in the Cup, and Ron Atkinson was knocking down the door straight away because he tore Earl Barrett a new one on that side. And Ron Atkinson was basically, how much do you want from him? And then when he said when he went away, he found out later that when he went away on under 21 duty, that because Kevin Keegan was the under 21 manager, and it was a game at St James's Park, and Kevin Keegan went to the powers that be at Sunderland and asked if he could take Martin Smith then. So he had chances to leave, but when you speak to him, he's like us. He's like, oh, well, I support Sunderland, so
yeah. No, it would be hard, wouldn't it? But even just on a purely footballing level, as we've said, him, Bridge, Russell, Peter Reid probably didn't put the faith in him that he would have done, because he gave far less talented players a lot more opportunities than he gave those three.
Interestingly, so sorry, just quickly though, from Gav, from your point of view, because I think me and Martin saw Martin Smith come through, and I imagine Martin Smith, when you started going, Martin Smith was just there. Because when we came, I remember all my mates and us, when Martin Smith first started playing, we pretended to be Martin Smith, on the playground and all that sort of stuff, because he was the one shining light in the early 90s. It was like everyone hung on to him and went, oh yes, he's the only thing we've got. But where was he at? What was when you started watching them, because he was already in the squad and he was just a young player? Did you like hold him that high that he'd come through, or was he maybe kind of dipped? He's kind of well dipped a bit when you started going to the games.
Yeah, he was a bit part by that point. I remember him having a really good game, I think against Grimsby in the Cup. I don't know if that rings a bell with either of you. But I seem to remember him playing well at the Stadium of Light in a cup game. And other than that, he just wasn't, for me as a kid, he wasn't somebody who ever was about. He was very bit part by that point, I think, and I was starting to go to games.
Yeah, well, sliding doors moment, you've mentioned them already, Martin, but that Portsmouth game in that playoff season, the first one at the Stadium of Light. So Martin Smith starts the game, and we're flying against Portsmouth, absolutely battering them. He's on the left, Alan Johnson's on the right, and that might not have been right. I can't remember who was on the other side. I'm guessing it was Alan Johnson.
Well, yeah.
And but if he wasn't injured, but whatever. But someone else was on the right hand side. He was on the left, and at half time he picks up a pretty bad, and in the days leading up to it, we'd sealed the deal for Nicky Summerby. Craig Russell went the other way, and Nicky Summerby was on the bench, and we're absolutely battering. We end up winning 4-1, 4-0, I think it is, and Martin Smith ends up coming off for Nicky Summerby with a bad injury, And then Nicky Sumby scores that fourth goal, I think. And Nicky Sumby and Alan Johnston go on on the wings for Sunderland to be absolutely brilliant for a couple of years. But Martin Smith he started off that game and he was kind of Peter Reid's first choice.
And I think that was when Johnson went on the left, wasn't it? That was the first time we'd seen Johnson on the left. So even if Martin Smith had come off, if somebody hadn't been there, he probably Johnson on the right and brought somebody else on left. Say if Martin Scott had been on the bench, he probably would have pushed Mickey Gray up onto the left midfield and dropped Scotty back at fullback. So I think, there's a lot of good things Peter Reid did on purpose. I think that was just one of those accidental things he stumbled upon, and it worked out, didn't it?
Yeah, like the whole Dickie Ord and Andy Melville getting injured at the same time, and Craddock and Darren Williams coming in.
Yeah, exactly. 2006, we've already mentioned Kenny Cunningham. He made his debut on August the 6th in 2006 in a 2-1 defeat away at Coventry. And this was Quinny's first game as manager. He brought Bobby Saxon in to be alongside. And we had a bit of a funny summer, as we've earlier in this pod. But we went in front from Daryl Murphy's goal. Gary McSheffrey scored the winner for Coventry because we got beat 2-1, as I said. Do you remember who scored the equaliser for Coventry that day, though?
Stern John.
Yeah. So Stern John, who obviously later on that season signed for us and became, he wasn't a massively influential player, but he scored a couple of important goals for Roy Keane. Obviously joined Dwight York and Carlos Edwards. That was sort of Trinidadian connection. But there was a former Sunderland player with the game poised with us. It wasn't poised. We were winning 1-0 at this point. A former Sunderland player came on and was quite instrumental in the turnaround. Can you remember who that was? Don Hutchinson, yeah. I completely forgot he played for Coventry until I looked up this earlier.
I can remember this. I remember watching this on TV in the pub. It was live on Sky.
I was in the New Derby.
Straight away.
I was in the away end, so there you go.
No, but I can always remember that game just standing out, being on TV, and Don Hutchison coming on and changing the game.
Yeah.
It was. We'd had a fairly optimistic pre-season because you don't know what to expect when you get relegated. Quinny had come in, so there was that optimism anyways, and we didn't know he was going to be a useless manager, did we? So we were still pretty excited about the season starting and these new players and stuff. But I think it all came sort of crashing down to earth that day, didn't it? We got that realization this isn't good. And, we were talking before about the signings that Quinny made, but there was only one new player started in that game, and that was Kenny Cunningham, as you mentioned. So it wasn't a massively different side to the one we'd had the year before.
No.
There were a lot of those same players hanging about. And yeah, I mean, it was. We were hoping for something to kick off and something to be, or at least to give us the hope that this was all going to change. And right in front of the world, watching on Sky TV, we chucked away a 1-goal lead and lost the game, and we returned back to the Championship. So it wasn't fun. Yeah,
but we all thought, looking at that dugout when the cameras panned to it, you've got Niall Quinn and Bobby standing next to Bobby Saxon because he brought Saxon in as his assistant. And you're like, how can it go wrong with them two standing there?
Now, I say we actually had a pre-season. We'd only played 4 games, but we'd won all of them, conceding the goal. You brought down to earth a little bit, but even that Coventry game, we actually played all right in spells. But then you went on to lose the midweek game at home to Birmingham. And you go, I think they just come down with us. I think Steve Bruce was their manager, wasn't he? And we get beat 1-0 at home. Then we conceded. Did we concede penalty? Did Clive Clark give away the penalty on his debut? I've got a feeling.
Yeah, on his debut, and didn't he come on as sub as well? He actually came on for Steve Colwell. And yeah, looking at their side, talking about ex-players, they had Larson and Bentner in their team.
And then we go the next game on the Saturday at home to Plymouth, and we get turned over 3-2 at home to Plymouth. And you go to Southend, and you lose 3-1, and all of a sudden, from having all this bloody optimism in the pre-season, you descended to the bottom of the table. You play Bury. In that Bury game was the world-class manager statement.
Yeah, and just to slightly go back to that Coventry game, and again, since we're in the business of tangents on this on this feature. You mentioned Trinidadian players and Stern John, and there was one other Trinidadian player in that Coventry team who started that day. And does anybody know who he is and why he's unique?
Oh,
I want to say Chris Birchall.
Yeah, correct.
yeah, right.
Correct. Chris Birchall was the first white person to represent Trinidad in over 60 years in any competition when he played for Trinidad. His mum was born in the port of Spain. So she wasn't even Trinidadian technically. She was born there. She didn't have sort of Trinidadian heritage or anything. And yeah, he was always, if I remember back when we had like Jones, York, Stern John, Carlos Edwards all playing in Trinidad's team at the same time, you had Chris Birchall on the wing, who was completely unique in this team. And I think he was actually linked with us as well for a time as well. I seem to remember him being linked with a move to Sunderland. So yeah, but he played that day and he started.
It says a lot just looking at those first home games that season. Birmingham opening first home game of the season, 26,000. Then getting beat 4,000. And actually, that West Brom game when Keane was in the stands, it was only 24,000. It's amazing to think that, isn't it?
But then
People had given up.
Keane's, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because you say there was that wave of optimism, but you'd had Quinn come in and take over. We were still coming in off the back of a bloody horrendously bad season. And for all of Quinny's promises that summer, not much had actually transpired. So he talked great, as he always does, but nothing had actually really transpired or come off yet. And our signings, we hadn't spent money on people. We were getting, 35-year-old Kenny Cunningham on the free transfer, 32-year-old Robbie Elliott on the free transfer. We hadn't made any sort of splash in the market. And you look at the crowd for Roy Keane's first home game, because obviously Keane came in after that West Brom game, beat Derby, beat Leeds away from home. And then did we play Leicester at home the game after?
Yeah.
I think the crowd goes up by about 10,000.
Yeah.
And you start building that momentum up. But it, and I think, when you look back at the timelines during that summer, the takeover kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And, for all Bob Murray had said he wanted to sell to Quinn and Quinn only, there was an awful lot of things that they seemed to need to figure out for that to happen. And the time he actually took over, it didn't give him a great deal of time to do anything. The action really kicked off.
Just look at you're talking about crowds and how they fluctuated during that season. After the initial wave of optimism of Keane coming in and all those new signings arriving, which again, as you said, between Keane sitting in the stands and there being 24,000 there for that West Brom game, we then had that mad deadline day. We won 2 games. Oh, sorry, we won 2 games. We went away at Derby, then beat Leeds in midweek, didn't we? And I think that was one where Graham Kavanagh scored and Stephen Elliott, I can't remember who got the other one. But if you look after that initial wave of optimism, where we had a midweek game against we had them against Sheff Wed, it rose again up to 36. Once the results started to plateau a bit, because people think about that season and think, oh bloody hell, we finished top and we were champions. We were pretty crap up until the turn of the year, and
it was
jumped around the middle of the lower mid-table to mid-table really, and the crowds didn't improve all that much. There wasn't that much optimism at all.
No, well, there wasn't. Well, there was optimism, but coming off the back of such a terrible relegation, after having very similar relegation 3 years or so before, that optimism was incredibly fragile. So you kind of wanted to believe, but it was really hard. It was really fragile. It was really hard to get going. And it was only when Johnny Evans came in, Carlos Edwards came in, and Danny Simpson came in, we really went on that run. And that was, when you look back, that was an astonishingly good run from January onwards, because we had no right to win the league that season, really.
Well, it was from January, but you look as late as the 30th of January, we've got Crystal Palace at home, a goalless draw that sees us drop down to 9th from 7th. 26,000 there. That's the 30th of June. So everything happened based last 3 months of the season, February, March, April. And it went from that. So the end of January, 26,000, goalless draw, hanging around mid-table. And then 3 months later, the end of April, you're beating Burnley in front of almost 45,000 and you're winning the championship.
Good 3 months, though, isn't
it? Yeah.
Oh,
like Gav's just said, though, it wasn't full season.
No, it wasn't.
Condensed into those few months, wasn't it?
was almost a third of a season, wasn't it? Really, in terms of
But you think about like, and obviously it was an amazing thing what we did in winning the league that year, but it wasn't an amazing season really. Like as a whole, it wasn't.
No.
And people probably do forget that. If you think back, you just think, oh well, it was brilliant. People think about if I close my eyes and think that season, there's the start when we were awful, and then Keane came in, and then there's just this bit in the middle where I've actually forgotten about it. I don't really remember much. I would have to really look into it. Oh yeah, I remember that game and I remember that goal. But then there's this whole sort of like blank period up until I think we played Derby at the end of February, and Liam Miller scored a header in the last minute, and it was around that time when people started to believe, because we were showing sort of a lot of resilience late on in the games and stuff, and there was a lot of close games if you look in that period around when we played Derby. We beat West Brom 2-1 away, we beat Barnsley 2-0 away, and that was the famous game where he left a load of players behind. Drawn with Stoke, and I seem to remember Darren Ward might have made a mistake in that game, which cost us a goal. Beat Hull, close game against Wolves, close game away at Southampton where Carlos Edwards scored that really good goal and Grant led her. Then we got beat at Colchester, and then that Burnley game, I mean, it was we scored, they scored for the majority of it. So, like, even then we weren't bowling teams away or anything, were we? I mean, it's quite remarkable when you look at it all written down in front of you and you see how the results play out and stuff, that we actually won the league, because it wasn't until
we
sort of very late in the season.
We won the league with 88 points. So if you consider, even last season, when you're looking at the points totals that we need to achieve to get in the top two positions, 88 points wouldn't win you the league very many seasons.
No. But yeah, it was a wild ride that season. I mean, I loved it because I went home and away every week, and I was at all them games at the end of the season, and Keane took us on such a wild ride. But to go all the way back to that Coventry game, it was like the difference between the Sunderland team, which ended the season, Roy Keane in charge, Johnny Evans at the back, Carlos Edwards in midfield, Dwight York in midfield. What a team we had. To that team against Coventry on the 6th of August, you would not have believed that we would win the league. It's not. I mean, look at that team against Coventry. Ben Anick left, Delap left, Collins played a big part that season, Ledbetter played a big part that season, Cunningham barely played. I don't think Caldwell barely played, and he might have even left. Tommy Miller was a bench warmer that season, I think.
Well, he actually farmed him out and loaned to Preston.
Yeah, he went out.
Yeah, but did he not come back and play on the bench a bit as well?
He did come back. Rightly. He actually played against us at the Stadium of Light.
Yeah.
Yes, that's Preston. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Dean Whitehead played a fair bit that season. Murphy played a decent amount that season. Stephen Elliott was bit part, didn't really play much.
Yeah.
Liam Lawrence ended up getting moved on after the whole videotape thing, didn't he? And then on the bench, Darren Ward ended up becoming number one. Stephen Wright went missing until that Barnsley game when we needed to name some subs, and he was brought into the team. Robbie Elliott was binned off, I think. John Stead was binned off. Kevin Kyle was binned off. Yeah. So like that
not many survived.
Not even the same team. No, that's right.
Yeah. Let's go back. 6th of August 2022, that was the game where we beat Bristol City, where Ellis Sims made his debut and scored 2 goals.
I just made us laugh that because I remember that game. It was my cousin's wedding, and me and my dad were watching it on my phone in the church. Yeah, I was good. I was missing that one, but yeah.
That was it. And there was another player made his debut that day for us, actually. So Sims made his debut. Another player came off the bench to make his debut. He replaced Jack Clark, I think, very late on. The struggle to get, if you don't look at it, Adji Elise was the debutant.
I guess that game. Patrick Roberts or something, but I was nowhere near, was it?
August the 7th, 1985, Dave Swindlehurst signed from West Ham for 80 grand, and we'll come back on to mention him in a short while. 99, it was that game at Stamford Bridge. We got beat 4-0 where Poyet scored that goal. Steve Bolden, Carsten Fredgaard made their debuts for us as we came back into the Premiership. On August 7th, 2004, there was another game against Coventry, first game of the season. Mick McCarthy was our manager. Stephen Elliott, Dean Whitehead and Liam Lawrence all made the debuts for us. Who was Coventry's manager?
Peter Reid. Yes, it was Peter Reid. Yeah, I was at that. I remember being at that game. Highfield Road. I think it might have been the last time we played there as well, before they moved. Might be wrong.
Was it Highfield Road?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Was it?
It was definitely at Highfield Road, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, well, you know what? I thought I'd never been to Highfield Road, but I was at that game, so I must have been.
Yeah. I'm just looking at it on StatCast just to make myself reassured. Yeah, it definitely was at Highfield Road. I'm fairly certain that was the last time we played there, though. I think after that they then moved stadium.
I was at that game, but couldn't remember which stadium it was.
Just very, very quickly, if anyone goes to look at the start of that season, Mick McCarthy did well to survive that and then go on to
massively
win the title.
But there's been a few bits and pieces that we've done for On This Day on the website where McCarthy's really fighting for his job in the press. And he's telling the fans to calm down because there's a massive rebuild going on. You just need to give us time. And, I know, again, we've talked to you right now, but the job he did to get that squad up next season was unbelievably good because you look at that squad that got promoted on paper and you should not get that squad up.
And once again, just in terms of the psychology of the fans compared to, it's interesting to compare it to the modern day. We've just come off the back of the season where we've lost in the playoffs and got to an FA Cup semi-final. Opening the first home game of the season after this Coventry defeat, 22,000 at the Stadium of Light against Crewe.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
It certainly is. But again, you're kind of coming off the back of a bloody awful season where you've gone from such promise with, Peter Reid and Quinn Phillips and all that sort of stuff going on. And that's pulled away from you so quickly and so badly mismanaged the season before with Howard Wilkinson coming in and all that sort of stuff. So there was we hadn't won for however bloody many games, have we?
Yeah, I remember that.
That was that point, wasn't it, where it was Preston away where we actually we didn't equal the record. If we hadn't won, we would have equaled Darwin's record.
There was national news, wasn't it? Watching how long it was till we won a game.
We are. There was national news how shit we were.
Yeah.
It's the 8th, so 1993, 2 days after Andy Melville signs, him and Ian Rogerson, Phil Gray and Derek Ferguson involved in a car accident, which basically was pre-season for Terry Butcher. Rogerson was out for a long time with a dislocated shoulder. I think we just played Middlesbrough in a pre-season friendly down at Ayresome Park. We had a trialist that day.
I was just about to say that.
Were you? See, there you go. But
I haven't got it in. I haven't got it in front of us, and I'm thinking I might be confusing two different seasons.
No.
But I'm going to throw a name in there.
This is one that always, for whatever reason, sticks in my mind, and
it does me as well.
Weird, isn't
it? But is it? You might go, you've got the wrong one. But I'm going to say Alan Harper.
Correct. Yeah. Right back from Everton. So, Alan Harper had been a big player for Everton in the mid-80s, hadn't he? Part of their a very successful team that they had Paul Bracewell and Peter Reid in centre midfield, Kevin Ratcliffe at the back, Southall and goal, Graham Sharp up front, Trevor Stephen, Gary Stevens, all those sort of players. And I'm rattling some of those off because we'll come on to mention that briefly in a little while. But Alan Harper was a big player for them. Had a trial with us, and we thought he was going to sign. Actually, I think Terry Butcher wanted to sign him, but for whatever reason, they couldn't work out terms. August the 8th, 1998. Opening game of the season after the playoff final against Charlton a few months before. Played QPR at St Paul Butler, made the debut. We beat them 1-0, but Lee Clark broke his leg in that game. And again, I know we've probably mentioned it before, but when you look back on that season, the 105-point season, and we played so bloody well all season. We lost to Lee Clark with a broken leg in the first game of the season. He was out till November. I think he'd come back in the Everton League Cup game. And Kevin Phillips in his foot in that League Cup game with Chester. So we missed both of those for months of that season. And to still run away with the league like we did without those two for large chunks was so impressive.
Yeah. Niall Quinn was injured at the start of the season for a big chunk as well.
He was.
I think he missed most of August and September and came back in October. But then
that's right.
Dickie
and Bridges played together for a decent period of time. 5 years later, after Sorensen made his debut. He left for Aston Villa after that relegation. So £2.25 million. 2007, August the 8th, Craig Gooden signed. That's somebody who obviously we've talked with and about a lot over recent weeks. But massive move, broke the British transfer record for a goalkeeper. 2015, August the 8th, we played Leicester. Dick Advocat had kept us up, gone back to Holland, opened the Florists, and come back to Sunderland. Played Leicester, and you can't go out Leicester away. It's a decent game to start the season off with 3-0 down in 25 minutes, and everything's gone to ship. I think that's the season Leicester won the league, isn't it? So it wasn't.
It is, yeah.
It wasn't too bad in context and hindsight, but at the time.
Do you remember the style of play that day or not?
Oh, we
went
open.
out there. Oh, Advocat had us set up in like a 4-3-3, and we had. I remember we had Kabul and Quates playing like split centre halves on the edge of the box, and they just had Jamie Vardy running through the middle of us. It was absolutely ridiculous. It's almost like he was trying to get himself sacked from the first game of the season because we just did not have the players to play the way that he apparently wanted to. That was a bad day. That I think we got our eyes open to the task ahead because you're right. I don't think anybody had foreseen that Leicester were going to go and do what they did that season. But we were looking at that and think with our new signings in tow, we had Yunus Kabul and Jermaine Lenz, and we had a half decent side. We thought we were going to do all right, and got absolutely tonked on the opening day.
Can you remember? It was only a few months earlier they came to the Stadium of Light and they drew 0-0 under Niall Quinn in the May before this, and they were celebrating because they'd stayed up.
Yeah,
and I can remember they were going to their fans in the away end at the North Stand up in the top, and they were like cheering all their players because that was the day they confirmed that they stayed in the Premier League under Pearson. Then Pearson lost his job, Ranieri came in, and if you look at the teams that played in the goalless draw and then started the season, it's not that far off the same team, to be honest.
Crazy. I'm just looking at their team now. I mean, I know this isn't. It's mainly the team that week, but Schmeichel, Richie Delat, Jeff Slupp, Danny Drinkwater, Wes Morgan, Robert Huth, Riyad Mahrez, Andy King, Jamie Vardy, Shinji Okazaki, Mark Albrighton. They had N'Golo Kante on the bench. But I mean, they're not superstars. It's crazy, really, when trust it can be done, though.
Yeah.
No, that's right.
Well, it's like Leicester's going to be Leicester fans for years because they played virtually the same 11 all season. For like generations, they'll be able to name that first 11 that won the title, basically.
No, it's legendary, isn't it, for them? I've realised I got my seasons mixed up earlier when we were talking about that Coventry game under McCarthy. That was the start of the season that we actually won the league, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, no, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, no, I got that season confused with the season before. So that Darwin record was we were challenging for that the season before. But we'll come on to that game that we start that season with in a sec because there's something quite interesting about that game. August the 9th, 1969, 3 people made their debuts for Sunderland in a 0-0 draw against Coventry, who seem to be popping up with great regularity on this pod. Mick McGovern, Joe Baker, and Colin Sim made the debuts for Sunderland. And Colin Sim's interesting because he worked at Concert Sports Centre when I was a kid. Colin Sim, and he used to take us for football training, and he used to love a Cruyff turn to Colin Sim. So Colin Sim taught me the Cruyff turn when I was a kid. So there you go. 1975, Mel Holden made his debut in the very first Anglo-Scottish Cup tie we played at Roker Park. This was a game against Carlisle. 1983, the Gore Gold Cup again features. We won that by beating St Mirren 1-0 with a goal from Paul Atkinson. And 2003, so this game against Nottingham Forest, so that started that season off that we were talking about earlier. We just got relegated from the top flight. Howard Wilkinson, Mick McCarthy overseeing however many games of straight defeats. We started the new season off. We had a fire sale during and we played Nottingham Forest at the City Ground, and we got beat. But this is a noticeable game because the pitch side temperature at kickoff was 39 degrees, which there isn't an official record, but it's reputed to be the hottest condition that we've ever kicked off a league game in. So that would have. And I think was it a late kickoff? I've got a feeling there might have been a later
It was
kickoff.
half five
Yeah.
kickoff.
Because wasn't that the game? Was it Jeff Whitley and Sean Thornton missed because they'd done something dumb during the couple of days before, and so they were absent from the team.
You know what? I've got a feeling I've done the on this day for this, and I can't remember that.
Blame it on A. Smithson. It's fine.
Yeah.
Neither of them were in the team. If that
Yeah, there you go. So both of them were supposed to be in the side, but they'd done something daft in the midweek, and Mick McCarthy had left them out. But I think Kevin Phillips was still at the club, and he hadn't joined Southampton. Yeah, I think his move to Southampton went through a few days later. It always it's one of those things where you go, why don't you just play him? Even if he only plays one game, chuck him in and he might get a goal. But I think, who did we play up front? Proctor and Kevin Kyle.
and Proctor, yeah.
I think, and that was a partnership.
And then on the bench was Marcus Stewart.
Yeah.
Yes, I did write the on this day.
There you go.
So I should know all about this, but yeah, and I said that we hadn't avoided defeat in a league fixture since the previous January, where we had a goalless draw with Blackburn Rovers. For our last victory, we had to go back further than the calendar year to go back to the 15th of December 2002, where we beat Gerard Houllier's Liverpool 1. So that was the kind of run we were talking about at the start of this season.
Oh, yeah. Unbelievable, wasn't it? But Marcus Stewart was on the bench because the club wanted to shot of him because he was on big money. And the club were desperately trying to move Marcus Stewart on. But Marcus Stewart hadn't put a transfer request in or anything. So McCarthy was kind of like, I'm quite happy as part of the side. But the club were trying to shift him. I think, didn't Ben Clark play? Did Ben Clark start that game?
No. Not this one.
Start next one. I think he's starting at home.
Because, and I was just looking again, that in the week leading up, apparently, the Sunderland squad agreed to take a wage deferral in order to help the club who were heavily in debt. Jason McAteer, who was the new club captain just appointed, he was questioned about the deferral, and he suggested it might not have been as unanimous as it for his reaction was, well, you'll have to ask our PFA rep about that, but the trouble is we haven't got one at the moment. He said there was no players who made their debuts, and apparently we were handed a cheque for £10,000 for the screening on Sky for the game, rather than the £600 a game the pre-season. But yeah, it was just, and what was it? It said we needed to avoid defeat in our next two First Division fixtures, or we would equal the worst sequence of defeats in the English game, which was held by Darwin for 104 years. Something that Mick McCarthy sounded overjoyed to be questioned on after the final whistle, because so what if we get the record? We might go on to win our next 10 games. We need to get back to the sort of team that got Sunderland into the Premiership in the first place. They could play, but they could also kick, bollock and bite and be scruffy and horrible. They were a team people could be proud of. So there you go.
The interviewer should have asked Mick if it couldn't go on like this any longer. It can.
And it was at the back for Nottingham Forest is a bit of a throwback that day. 38-year-old rolling back the years.
I've just had a look and I was surprised by it.
Yeah, Des Walker.
Des Walker, 38-year-old.
And just to complete the circle for some of this podcast, Darren was in goal for Forest.
And we were just talking about Leicester's team that won the league. Wes Morgan was on the bench as well for Forest that day. He'd probably only been a young kid then.
Yeah, I didn't realise this. I'm reading my own writing that I must have researched it somewhere. But in the build-up as well, it said, because you said Kevin Phillips, but he was paid a sign-and-off fee, apparently, of around $1 million to mitigate the drop in wages to 16 grand a week from 33 in order to fit in with Southampton's wage structure. It said the Southampton increased the transfer fee by $250,000 to 3.25 to rescue the deal, which meant after Watford's cut, Sunderland only received $2 million for Kevin Phillips.
Yeah, right.
Unbelievable, really, isn't it?
Ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, talking about Kevin Phillips, a very seamless link. August 10 years early, 1999, he scored 2 goals against Watford in the first ever Premier League games we played at the Stadium of Light. We beat Graham Taylor's Watford 2-0. Stefan Schwartz and John Oster also made their debuts. 2004, our first home game of the season, Steve Caldwell's debut, beat Crewe 3-1. Carl Robinson, Marcus Stewart and Stephen Elliott scoring the goals. August the 10th, last year, 2024, was the first game of the season. We beat Cardiff 2-0 with Luke O'Nien scoring, I think, didn't he? And Jack Clark getting his last goal for the club.
Mm.
But for the last bit that we are going to talk about in some depth today, we're going to go back to August the 9th, so 1985. And the headline of this is Eric Gates signs from Ipswich for, well, depending on what you read, 150 grand, 170 grand, or 200 grand. But when you look into Eric Gates signing for the club, it's quite a long, drawn-out and interesting story. So if you kind of go back to the start with Gatesy, Ferry Hill lad, but like a lot of players from the North East kind of tend to do in those days, you either went to Ipswich or Burnley. Both those clubs were quite heavily involved in North East football, scouted a lot of young players from the area. And Eric Lazenby-Gate, I always admired his middle name.
Yeah.
He went down to Ipswich as a young lad. I think he'd had trials at Borough because his brother Bill had been a Borough player for a spell, or a long spell in the 60s and early 70s. And Aston Villa and Wolves also wanted Eric Gates to sign, but he went down to Ipswich and he made his debut as a sub in 1973, October 73, so only a few months after we won the FA Cup. So you kind of think of generations kind of overlapping and periods of football overlapping. Sunderland have just won the FA Cup. Eric Gates is making his debut in top flight for Ipswich as an 18. It would take him a couple of years before he actually made his full debut. So he was 20-year-old, made his full debut against Derby at the baseball ground. And then he scored his first goal in the same month in a UEFA Cup tie against FC Bruges. So Bobby Robson was in charge of Ipswich at this point, and he had them, of a top flight club, had them competing in Europe and all that sort of stuff. It would be a couple of years later until he really, really established himself. So like when Eric Gates started, he apparently was a central midfield player, but it was Bobby Ferguson apparently who spotted his potential to kind of play a little bit further forward. And he played in what you'd now consider the number 10 role, but he played behind 2 strikers at Ipswich for a lot of the time. So he was that, we were talking before about the 2 centre midfield players who one will go and one will stay. This was very much, he's the attacking midfield player behind the two strikers. But he really established himself with first team at this point. And, 1970-80 season, he gets 13 goals. 80-81 season, he gets 12 goals. The FA Cup that we mentioned, the FA Cup 78, he played 30 games that league season, but he only played 1 game in the FA Cup. He played against Cardiff in the 3rd round for them. He didn't appear in the FA Cup. And Ipswich were ravaged with injuries in that in that season, and it was very much they would get turned over in the cup final, but of course they won it. He gets capped by England. Ron Greenwood calls him up, and he's part of this sort of group of players at Ipswich who get called up for international level. So Mick Mills, Russell Osman, Paul Mariner, and Terry Butcher, all made their debut. All got capped by England in that same season as Gatesy did. He played in a World Cup qualifying win over Norway at Wembley, beat Norway 4-0. And he also played in the World Cup qualifier in Bucharest, beating Romania 2-1. So these aren't friendly games or caps just given away to keep people happy or whatever. These are important games that Ron Greenwood needs to win. He's bringing Gates into the side. He wins the UEFA Cup. Sorry, Chris.
Well, I was just you were touching on it there, sorry, Martin, but that 80-81, that Ipswich, that's when Bobby Robson's they're at their peak then, aren't they? 80-81, flying in the cups, second in the league, UEFA Cup. I mean, and players getting capped left, right, and centre. This was when they reached their peak.
And again, when you look back, you don't really know much about him. You see him, coming to Sunderland towards the end of his career after playing for Ipswich for the majority of his career. And if you don't know Ipswich in the 70s and 80s, it's easy to think of Ipswich as a second or even third tier club. Ipswich were a really strong side in the top flight. And Eric Gates was a star in their team. He was a mainstay in their team. They won the 81 UEFA Cup final, which again, this is when the UEFA Cup was a really big deal. Played AZ Alkmaar. He played in both legs of the final, two-legged final. He'd scored a really important goal for Ipswich in the first round, second leg of that tournament. And they played Aris Salonika of Greece. And the Greeks had kind of come with a bit of a kick them up high, give them a booting sort of approach. And in the first leg, one of the players from Salonika was sent off for a really bad tackle on Eric Gates. Ipswich had won that 3-1. In the second leg, they went away to Greece, and Eric Gates famously doesn't like flying. So he basically said, I detest flying. I was scared stiff every journey. He used to come out in the sweats. And they'd gone into this game at Greece. He said they were going through the airport passport control, and he passed his passport over to the fella to check, and the fella just looked up at him and made the throat-slitting gesture to him and gave him his passport back. So that was the sort of welcome that they got, and obviously it was a very volatile atmosphere in the ground. Salonika went 3-0 up, and it looks as if they might actually go on to win the game, but I think Gatesy scored a goal from the edge of the box, but they were getting so much grief from the crowd. At the end of the game, Gatesy kind of rushes off. He gives the V's to the crowd and tells them where to go. He said one of the armed guards who was surrounding the field then tripped him up and stuck his rifle straight into his head because he caused so much trouble in the game. So that was 81. Fast forward to 1985.
Just very quickly, just very quickly before you leave 80-81 behind. One of the fascinating things that I saw him later in his career, like 15 years later when he played for Ipswich, or 10, 15 years later. But you talk about this season, you've got Alan Brazil playing up front, Paul Mariner, Eric Gates, top scorer for Ipswich that season, John Walk from midfield. In total, scored 36 goals in 64 games.
Oh, unbelievable.
That's incredible.
And Walker was one of those players who is central defence, centre midfield. And I think he went to Liverpool for a spell, didn't he? And came back to Ipswich.
Yeah.
But, you're talking with Gatesy, looking at what he's done in Europe, international level. He's scoring, double figures pretty much every season at this point. He's, 25, 26-year-old. He's really, really highly rated at Ipswich. Now, park Ipswich for a second and come back to the northeast. So, at Sunderland, 1984-85 season, first full season that Len Ashurst is in charge at Sunderland. He's making a few signings. It's also the first season Newcastle had been back in the top flight. So Newcastle had been out of the top flight football for 6 years. I think they got relegated in 77, 78. So they'd been out of the top league for 6 seasons. Arthur Cox had got them promoted. Kevin Keegan was there. Arthur Cox got them promoted, but then left to take over third division Derby. So Arthur was been Bob Stokoe's coach at the 73 Cup final, coach at Sunderland. Arthur Cox couldn't agree a new contract, and he wasn't happy with the amount of money the board were going to give him to get a top flight team together. Kevin Keegan obviously been instrumental in that sort of resurgence for Newcastle, but he'd retired then. So you're going into Cox is going into top flight. Still with people like Chris Waddle, Peter Beardsley in the team, but he wants money to spend. The board ain't going to give him it. So he leaves to go to third division Derby. So if you can kind of imagine that these days, it's unparalleled really in modern football. Jack Charlton takes over at Newcastle and he keeps them up and we go down. Chris Waddle is usually highly rated. He's on England call-ups. He's maybe 24, 25 at this point. Arthur Cox had signed him for £1,000 from Towlaw. Chris Waddle's at the end of his contract and he's made it clear he wants to leave. So he's got this going on. And remember, at this point in time, even if players' contracts expired, the club still held the registration. And if the purchasing club couldn't agree a fee with the club who held the registration, the player could sign another contract, have to go to tribunal, and the club would have to abide by the tribunal's price. Len Ashurst is in charge at Sunderland. We obviously milk up final, but get relegated. Going to this pre-season where Jack Charlton's kept Newcastle up, Len Ashurst is overseeing Sunderland's relegation. And Jack Charlton knows he's going to bank some money for Chris Waddle. Chris Waddle has made it clear to everybody that he wants to go to Spurs. He's made it clear to Spurs. So Spurs are offering a bit of money for Waddle to Newcastle, but Chelsea have offered £1,000 for Waddle. And Newcastle have accepted this, and they're trying to push Waddle to sign for Chelsea because they think that's a good deal. We're not going to get better than that at tribunal. So Newcastle are in this like little bit of a holding pattern that they don't know how much money they're going to get for Chris Waddle. So at the same time, Jack Charlton's trying to rebuild his side, or build his side up, replace Waddle, spend the money, all that sort of stuff. And the player that Jack Charlton wanted to replace Chris Waddle was Eric Gates. So on the 13th of May, now if you bear in mind that the season had ended only a couple of days earlier. I think it hadn't ended for... no, Ipswich still had one game left. Our season had ended. So we played our last game of the season, to get relegated. We'd already been relegated before, but kind of put nail in the coffin. Our last game of the season was at home to Ipswich and 2-1. Jack Charlton identified Eric Gates as the player he wanted to replace Chris Waddle. Now, Eric Gates at the time, we talked about what he did a few years. He'd signed a new 4-year contract at Ipswich the previous summer, so he still had 3 years left in his contract at Ipswich. Everton, who we've already mentioned in this pod, were winning the league, winning a European trophy. They were the best team in the country by a mile. They'd gone all out to sign Eric Gates during that season. So Everton had desperately tried to get, he would be brilliant to play alongside Graham Sharp. They couldn't get him out of Ipswich. Ipswich refused to sell. Bobby Ferguson was in charge. Come the summer, Newcastle looked Eric Gates to replace Waddle. Everton have moved on to Gary. Everton wanted Eric Gates, couldn't get him, so they go and get Gary Lineker instead. So you're talking about different sorts of players. But in terms of profile of where they're at, interesting when you look back on it. So Newcastle were talking about a $250,000 deal for Eric Gates. And again, if you look at Chris Waddle being talked about as maybe a $500,000 player, Eric Gates has been talked about as a £250,000 player. So, nobody's rating Eric Gates as highly as Chris Waddle at this point. Gates is almost 30. But in terms of regard, he's held. So, mid-May, going out publicly saying we want to sign Eric Gates. And this rumbled on. It's kind of been made known by Bobby Ferguson that Ipswich would sell. And they need to sell because they're in a bit of financial trouble. And there's Gates, Terry Butcher, and Russell Osman, who they think they can get some decent money for. Gates is the oldest one, so the kind of thing we'll get him out because we've got more chance of getting more money for the other people down the track. You say there's turned down a substantial bid from Everton, but this kind of rumbles on all summer. So you've got the situation in Sunderland where come the 24th of May. So this is maybe 3 or 4 weeks or 3 weeks after the season's finished. Len Ashurst is still in charge at Sunderland, and he's talking about what he wants to do for the new season. He's been on holiday. Frank Burrows has been looking after things at Roker Park. Newcastle is still in limbo, so they still don't know how much they're going to get for this tribunal fee for Waddle. So they can't really extend their offer for Gates until they know what they're going to get in for Chris Waddle. So I think come early or mid-June, you've got Laurie McMenemy obviously comes into Sunderland. All the Gates going to Newcastle. Articles from May, June, and July, and Eric Gates is there all summer. It's just Eric Gates wants to join Newcastle. Newcastle want Eric Gates. So you get to this sort of point rumbling on, and say we sign him on the 9th of August. On maybe the 30th of July or something, there's a headline in the Journal. Door slams on Gates. So Jack Charlton's got fed up. He hasn't been able to agree terms with Eric Gates. He's agreed terms with Switch, but Gates is wanting too much money. Jack Charlton's pulled out, and apparently the falling through this proposed transfer, it caused big disappointment across the whole club and Newcastle fans, because again they really wanted somebody high profile to bring in. At this point, they'd received $590,000 for Waddle, so the tribunal had decided on that fee, whereas Chelsea's offered $800,000 for him just a couple of months earlier. So on 9th of August, the news breaks pretty suddenly that Eric Gates is set to sign for second division Sunderland. Now, this is, again, a player who's played all of his career in top-flight football. He's never kicked a ball outside the top. He's been linked with Newcastle, and I think he wanted to come back to the Northeast. He said, obviously, our references hate of flying. In the summer, he doesn't go abroad. He comes back to Barnard Castle, and that's where he spends his summer holidays each year. So, report in the paper on the 9th of August that Eric Gates was now discussing $175,000 move to $175,000 Sunderland. And this was after another tribunal thing had come into place, joined Man U, and that fee was decided by tribunal, and we got $275,000 from Man U from the tribunal for Turner. So now we had a bit of money for McMenemy to spend. So he'd been able to agree a fee with Bobby Ferguson. So Gates very, very quickly signs up. It wasn't as if they hadn't mention of Sunderland with Eric Gates throughout the summer. It had been mentioned as a possibility, knowing that he wanted to come back to the Northeast, but given Newcastle were in the top flight, we the second division, all of the talk, all of the speculation, all of the expectation that Gates would either go to Newcastle, or he would get another top flight move because of the Everton connection that he'd had the previous season. Signs a 3-year contract, bringing 14 years of Portman Road to an end. His interview upon signing says, "I was really disappointed that I didn't go to Newcastle when everything sunk in. At the time, half of me wondered whether I really wanted to go there, and the other half wondered whether they really wanted me. But a week after it all fell through, I felt disappointed. I could have been set up for life at Ipswich." So he's left a big contract behind at Ipswich. So I could have been set up for life at Ipswich, but I needed some motivation. To be honest, I was a little surprised that Ipswich had made it prepared to let me go when the Newcastle deal was agreed. Nothing had been mentioned all summer, and then I was told about Newcastle. Maybe it was something to do with their wage structure. They have thought it would be better cashing in me and replace me with a younger player. In a roundabout way, it was all a Newcastle business, which quickened transfer to Sunderland. I didn't want any more wondering over my future. So there wasn't any. I'm delighted to be at Roker Park. It's a great move. I've always liked the club. I'm really looking forward to playing for Laurie McMenemy. It was all about, he wanted to come back to the Northeast. And he did kind of say, my family are all Middlesbrough daft. That's all to do with my brother. I used to go to Ayresome Park every week when I was a boy. In the summer, I'd never go anywhere for holidays. Just have 3 weeks up at Castle, so I'm delighted to have signed for Sunderland. So it was a lifestyle move for him, you'd suggest, but all of the expectation that summer and all of the all of the desire, I think, from Gates was to get back to North East, and he was expecting to go to Mags. He did talk about Sunderland a little bit. He said, I think Sunderland done very well to get me for the fee that they've got me for, which is good. He's I'm a fit lad with no injury problems. I'm ready to go. And McMenemy said he's a class player. He'll benefit the rest of the team. But just like me, he's not here to sit in his backside. So,
jeez.
So there you go.
Just quickly on that, Martin. Can you imagine if a player said that in the social media era? All that upon time for a team.
No,
it'd be a non-starter, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be. And we've talked a little bit Sunderland Newcastle kind of relationship in the past, haven't we? And while the derbies were always fierce, the actual relationship between the clubs and the fans was nowhere near as fierce or as nasty, I guess, as it is today.
Yeah. Well, I was just how it all played out. Apologies if you mentioned Martin, because I was reading around it. But have you got what happened 2 days later at Newcastle?
Did they sign somebody?
2 days later, Jack Charlton resigned.
So so Charlton got pissed off with obviously not having the backing of the board to go and do all of this stuff that he wanted to do. It's really interesting. So you kind of read back on this this whole spell this summer. Jack Charlton was also trying to get Bob Boulder in from Liverpool as goalkeeper. We sent him. There was a number of other players he was trying to get in. Beardsley, they were trying to keep Beardsley, but there was lots of talk about Peter Beardsley going. Kenny Wharton was a big player for Charlton. There was lots of speculation about Wharton leaving. So there was obviously an awful lot of turmoil at St James's Park, which is obviously horrible to see. But yeah, we obviously took advantage of it.
Well, yeah, because they only signed one player, Alan Davies from Man United, who didn't particularly do well. But that was also the breakout season of Paul Gascoigne, because he ended up playing kind of well over 30 league games that season. But that was so that was his breakout season. But if you look at they finished mid-table in the top flight, and they had players like Beardsley, Glenn Roeder, Jeff Clark was playing for them, and for him to drop down. And the other interesting kind of, again, sliding doors if Eric Gates had gone there, because one of their strikers that season who played 20 league games was, and this was the 85-86 season, was Billy Whitehurst. Yeah, who on New Year's Day, or I think it was New Year's Day.
I think it was. Yeah,
and James's night, it ended up breaking Paul Bracewell in half. Yeah. Who then ended up coming back was purely because he had the injuries. But Billy Whitehurst might not have been playing if Eric Gates had gone there. And
every chance, isn't it?
So it's all these things, but yeah. And Willie McFall took over 2 days later, so there was kind of all this upheaval. But you think we're getting all these players, and we're going to not, whereas they're still finishing mid-table through all that turmoil, and we ended up struggling in the second division.
Well, we were very sorry, Gav. Go on.
Sorry, yeah, just on that, on Jack Charlton leaving Newcastle, it was actually fans protesting outside of the ground calling for his head. That led to his dismissal, by all accounts.
Wonder if
the first or last time that they've shouted for a manager to leave, and it was over the Eric Gates signing, of course.
Well, I said they would have had all the coffins out and everything like that, wouldn't they? Clubs dying, and all the city's supply of bed sheets have dwindled and all that. But yeah, it all kind of plays into each other, doesn't it?
No, it absolutely does. So we had this spell, obviously, in between that where Ashurst was still in a job for a decent period of time after the season's actually finished. Then he got sacked, and very quickly we were linked with Ian Porterfield, David Pleat, Jim Smith, and Laurie McMenemy, who was on holiday in Barbados. They actually got him in on the 8th of July. He was only 48 when he took over. I always think McMenemy's a really old manager at this point. He's only 48. And the bookies immediately put us at 7-4 to come straight back up, which they obviously got quite wrong.
Didn't, because of that cruise or that holiday in Barbados wasn't basically Tom Curry just waiting for him to come back to be able to speak to him? I remember reading the stories, but
he was.
you've got the whole Eric Gates thing. I mean, yeah, okay, it just goes to show, because you can imagine that a lot of this was because of McMenemy, because our thoughts of McMenemy are very different to the day that he joined the club, because he's this huge manager, and he's like well regarded across nationally, first division, top. Southampton were regularly finishing the top 6 in the first division. He'd won the cup with them, legend there. And for Sunderland to get him, it was a huge thing, and it was this expectation that we'd bounce back up and almost have a Southampton type era where we'd be at the top of the first division and we'd challenge for cups and things like this. So attracting the likes of Eric Gates kind of makes sense. All these other players, we talked about two days prior signing Dave Swindlehurst, and then on the first day of the season, it's Swindlehurst and Gates up front, isn't it, making their debuts?
That's right. And McMenemy, again, you kind of look back at McMenemy as a football manager with his Sunderland spell firmly ingrained at the front of your recollections, aren't you? But at this point, McMenemy's coming into Sunderland. He's been at Southampton for years. Only the season before, Arsenal had tried to get him, and he turned them down. When Ron Atkinson took over at Man U, McMenemy had pretty much agreed to go to Man U and then had a last-minute change of heart and stayed at Southampton. So and I think McMenemy had left Southampton, hadn't he? He decided he wanted to have a new challenge, and he came up to Sunderland. But again, you're talking about probably the most successful manager. You're talking about England manager, but the most successful club manager, English manager at that time. He's only 48-year-old. And we get him in the second division. So he's going for the same sort of model as he went with at Southampton, isn't he? At Southampton, he signed Kevin Keegan, Dave Watson, Alan Ball, all of these, Peter Shilton, all of these big-name players, experienced players. And you see, he brought Swindlehurst in. Frank Gray, he'd brought in already at this point. He signed Seamus McDonough, who was an experienced goalkeeper. Very interestingly, we almost signed Pat Jennings. So Pat Jennings was 40 at this point, and he'd gone back to Spurs and hadn't played the season before, but he was still Northern Ireland's goalkeeper. And he wanted to play in the 86 World Cup for Northern Ireland. So he wanted to have a club to play at for the 85-86 season. We'd agreed everything with him to come in our first choice goalkeeper. But Pat Jennings already had a holiday booked. So he asked for the first 2 weeks of the season off so he could continue his holiday. And McMenemy said no, and he signed Seamus McDonough instead. I think Pat Jennings ended up going to Everton for a little spell. And then he was somewhere else. But he played for Northern Ireland at the 86 World Cup, and then he retired after that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's all these sliding doors moments. But I was talking about McMenemy coming, but the problem was, and with Arsenal and Man United, they probably would have went, well, you want to come to this club, so we're not. What were you getting paid at Southampton? Actually, we'll pay you a bit less because it should be about ambition. Whereas to attract them to Sunderland was, we will make you the highest paid manager in the country, and you will almost be a director club.
Well, he was managing director. He wasn't actually listed as manager. He was listed as managing director.
So it's that sort of package which never works out, because it's for you're coming for the wrong reasons.
No, that's exactly right. So, look, Gatesy, he made his debut a couple of days later in a friendly away at Aston Villa, and as everyone knows, it didn't really work out for him in that first couple of seasons.
Just quickly, that debut, McMenemy's first game in charge, second division, Blackburn Rovers at Roker Park. Who was manager of Blackburn Rovers then?
Let Gav have that one. See if Gav can guess. Somebody who we've already mentioned today.
Standing next to Quinny on the sidelines.
It wasn't Darren Ward.
Oh, Sacco.
Yeah,
it was. Bobby Saxon's manager of Blackburn Rovers in McMenemy's first Sunderland game, or competitive game anyway. Got beat 2-0, of course, and then went there.
But it's actually interesting. You're talking about pre-season and that the impact of pre-season results or what have you like that. But McMenemy's pre-season, took over. We beat Lincoln away 3-1. We beat Doncaster away 2-0. We beat Hartlepool away 2-0. And everyone's, thinking this is going to be great when his walk back up. And of course, we having 2 top flight strikers, we lose the first 5 games consecutively without registering a single. It turned pretty quickly. But it was really that third division season where Gates hit his stride. We talked at length before, haven't we, about his partnership with Marco, but nobody at the club expected to be there for the 87-88 season. They tried desperately to move him on, but he ended up staying, and eventually I think Dennis Smith was pretty pleased that he did hang around.
Yeah, we talked about that complete fluke, wasn't it? That's injury and all that. Talking about the Peter Reid thing, that happened with Reedy and almost happened with Dennis Smith because he wasn't first choice, and then comes in with an injury. And I think basically he had him and Marco fit, and it was like, "Can you help us out?" He went, "You just give us the ball, I'll knock it in behind," and away we go.
That's right. I think the talk about all these things, the more you realise just how much bloody luck's involved, don't you?
Oh yeah, well that's it.
Unbelievable amount of luck.
Yeah, and then we're talking about him signing. But have you ever, just because I think it's a brilliant story, he's done this at Hawkins. Probably everyone's heard it, but how he actually retired at Carlisle United.
Yeah,
where basically he says it's a midweek game, freezing cold, rain's lashing down. I think it was like snow on the pitch and all this. Like he's on the bench for Carlisle United, and there's like 5 minutes to go, and they're getting stuffed, and he's like looking out on the pitch. I remember who the manager was, but the manager turned to Gatey and says, "Go and get warmed up." And Gatey went, "No bother, boss." And he ran straight down the tunnel, ran the bath, hopped straight in the hot bath. The manager came in saying, "What you doing in there?" He says, "Well, you told us to warm up." And he retired after that.
There's apparently a first part to that story. So, I don't know where Carlisle but Carlisle were going past Ferry Hill or Barncastle or wherever Gatesy was living to get to the away game that they were playing. And the manager told Gates he wouldn't stop and pick him up. Gates had to drive to Carlisle, park his car, get in the team bus, get on the bus that's going to go past his front door, go to the game. So Gates was already pissed off that he had to do that. So when the manager asked him to come on the freezing cold night for a minute, he decided that was that. And
well, there was, and again, I'm really trying to rack my brains now, but there was a brilliant story about his contract at Carlisle where there was a mistype or someone had wrote it out wrong and there was an extra zero on it. And he took this contract to Carlisle and they went, "We're not paying you that." He went, "Oh, there's my contract. You did it." So there it is. It's contract. It's all legal. So they had to pay him all this like stupid amount of money to play for Carlisle.
No, well, he'll have been worth every penny. He has a pub in Durham, doesn't he? And
Curious Mr. Fox, I think it's called.
Now we've contacted Curious Mr. Fox to try to get in touch with Gatesy, haven't we? So if you're listening, Eric, give us a call.
It was brilliant to see him on with Marco, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's class, wasn't it?
On the shirt release.
Good. And I think the club have done well with that sort of stuff. Like Phillips was on the home kit video popping up with something, wasn't he? So it's good to join all those dots for people as well. It's it can be pretty special. But Gacy's Sunderland career certainly took a quick upward trajectory after his first couple of seasons because he wasn't the only one, but none of the big name players who McManamy signed for vast amounts of money really did a great deal. And Gatey was probably the one who did ultimately sort of do a lot at Sunderland because the likes of Alan Kennedy, George Burley, Swindlehurst, people like that didn't really achieve much, did they?
No, that's it.
Right, well, I reckon we've done quite well without Kelvin and Drew. We've pretty much hit the 2.5 hour mark, haven't we? So yeah. We can't blame them for that anymore.
No, it's just blame me because it'll probably be a while till I'm back these. So just say it was my fault, and then you two can avoid the blame for longer.
Well, see, Gav, before you kind of made you on these, you have wondered how we keep going on about all this stuff, and now you've actually seen it in person.
Well, there's so much you haven't done as well, so it means this podcast has a good few years left in it, really, doesn't it? There's just so much shit.
It's like when Martin was talking through, even like, the defeat against Chelsea, we could do a whole 2 hours just on that. In 99. It's easy to get going.
There's so much. Just pull a little thread and you don't know what's going to come out to you.
Yeah. Oh, well, we've seen. I mean, God, the amount of... We're talking about tangents. Talking about how City status is shelled out. We've ended up talking about the Beatles in one. We've ended up talking about bloody all sorts. Literally all sorts. The one with Rob Mason.
That was a brilliant. I was chuckling listening to that.
Absolutely brutal.
Even though I couldn't see Rob's moment of realization, you could hear it. I've been done like a kipper. Anyway, we will wrap it up there. So, as always, thank you for listening. If you've got any memories of anything that we've talked about today, just email hawaythepodcast@safc@gmail.com. Drop us a line on Twitter or Spotify or wherever you want to communicate on, and getting some nice comments about these pods, so keep them coming. It's always a nice little boost to know people are listening to it. Just keep an eye on the website as well, rokerreport.sbnation.com, as well as all of the On This Day pieces, all of the latest news and insights coming out of the club at the moment. And we'll be back tomorrow with another pod. We'll be back we'll be back next week with another episode of On This Week. So until then, it's goodbye from all of us.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.